A Stronger Version of Me. Book 5 of the Destiny Clark Saga. Written by Cindy Ray Hale. Text copyright 2019 by Cindy Ray Hale. Production copyright 2023 by Cindy Ray Hale. Author's note. This is a rewrite of the original series, The Destiny Trilogy, by Cindy Ray Hale. This book takes place during the events of the second portion of Synchrony, Book 2 of the Destiny Trilogy. Scenes and events have been changed and rearranged. I hope you love this version of the story even better than the original. But don't forget, the original story is always available for purchase at smarturl.it/synchrony. Chapter 1, Destiny. It's getting late, we should probably get you back into the house before you freeze, Preston said, pushing up off of the creaky cot in my family's treehouse. I dreaded facing my little sister, Olivia. Going back into the house meant dealing with her sympathy, or worse yet, her "I told you so." Come on. Preston grabbed my hand and pulled me up to stand. Do I have to? Aren't you half frozen by now? If I was frozen, I barely noticed. My entire body was still numb from the traumatic events of my breakup with Isaac. I was grateful for Preston. Who knew how long I'd be outside in the cold if it wasn't for him? When we got to the house, Olivia was lounging on the couch in the family room watching Korean dramas. She glanced at Preston and me and said, "Yay, Preston. You brought her back from the dead." She turned to me. "You shouldn't cry over Isaac. There are way better guys out there." Easy for her to say. Her heart wasn't the one aching for the guy who'd just betrayed her. Want to have a movie party with me tonight? I'm going to have a Korean drama marathon. I have snacks. She held up a basket with a gigantic hot pink bow fastened to the handle, stocked with glass bottles of root beer, Sour Patch Kids, gummy bears, and several kinds of chocolate. My scowl melted away as I eyed the basket of my favorite snacks. I was a huge sucker for Korean dramas. Olivia's best friend from Bethel was from Korea, and she'd gotten us hooked on them. Michael put you up to this, didn't he? It was actually my idea, but he took me to the store while you were hiding in the treehouse. I'm going to head home. I can see that you'll be well taken care of, Preston said. I smiled at him. Thanks for tonight. It really meant a lot. Anytime, he said as he opened one of the French doors that led to the front porch. It's what I'm here for. He wasn't stupid enough to fall for me, was he? Because he would only end up getting his heart broken. Chapter 2, Preston. My mind reeled as I walked down the Clark's porch steps. Hate, envy, ecstasy, despair, hopelessness, and joy swirled within me. I could still feel her body against mine, the way she had fit perfectly in my embrace. Had she felt it, too? But I had to remember that just because she trusted me with her secrets didn't mean she wanted me like she wanted him. But she had trusted me. It was a start. She'd opened up to me on a level I'd never seen from her before, and now I felt bonded to her in a way I hadn't thought possible. I climbed into my truck and drove home. Although I was glad Isaac wouldn't be allowed to touch her again, I hated to see her suffer. I'd felt completely helpless. How could I make it better for her? I couldn't take away his actions. No matter what I did or said, those bad memories would still be in the back of her mind, torturing her. The best thing she could do would be to find the strength to pull through it. She could do it. And I would be there by her side for as long as she would allow. When I came in the house, through the garage, Megan and Brinley pelted me with questions. Preston. You're back. Brinley squealed, jumping from the couch. Was Destiny okay? Megan asked. She was having a hard time, I answered. How'd it go? Did you kiss her? Brinley asked. I pointed a finger at her. I refused to answer that, I said, my cheeks reddening. What happened with her and Isaac? Megan asked. If you want to know, you'll have to ask Destiny. Ugh, Brinley said. You suck. But don't call her right now. Olivia's cheering her up with Korean dramas. I'll text her later, then, Megan said. She needs to know we're here for her. We need to forgive others, even when it feels impossible, Megan said from the pulpit as she gave her talk in church. Forgiveness seemed to be a recurring theme in church today. I glanced over at Destiny from where I sat in the chapel, but she wore a hardened expression. Guess she wasn't feeling it. After the meeting, I followed her out of the chapel. The missionaries approached her with friendly smiles on their faces. Where's your friend, Isaac? He told us he was going to start coming to church with you. He'd come with her for the second time a couple of weeks ago, and he'd acted pretty interested. Who knew if it wasn't all just an act, though? Destiny peered down her nose at Elder Benson, the missionary with blonde hair. Yeah, she said. Well, I guess you can't believe anything he says, because he's not here, she said bitterly and turned and walked away. The elders watched her retreat and gave me a quizzical look. I only shrugged. It wasn't my place to tell her story. I watched as Olivia caught up to her in the hall on her way to Sunday school. I know Isaac dumped you, Olivia scolded with her hands on her hips. But you don't need to be rude to the missionaries because of it. They didn't do anything wrong. Don't say his name around me, Destiny said with a warning in her voice. Anyway, he didn't dump me. I dumped him. Get it straight. I came up behind Destiny. She sounded so broken. I hated seeing her like that. You should head to class, Olivia. Olivia nodded slightly at me and said, I'll see you later. Chin up. I tapped Destiny lightly under the chin with my forefinger. You'll get through it. I'm dreading going to school tomorrow, she said. Can I start going to school with you and Megan? A smile twitched on the corners of my mouth. It wouldn't bother me. Megan appeared beside me. You should. I'm considering it, she said. She was willing to give up her choir, even her part in the musical, to escape having to see him every day. What about Les Mis? I said. You're one of the leads. You can't give all that up just because of some jerk. She sighed. Of course, you're right. Why are you always right about everything, Preston? I shrugged, and the right side of my mouth tugged upward. Chapter 3, Isaac. I called in sick to Aunt Bethany Saturday morning. I was too much of an emotional wreck to deal with people. I ended up spending most of the day on my land, sitting in my truck, staring at the spot where Destiny and I had been stargazing. When Sunday morning came around, I thought about going to church to see her, but I didn't have the guts. Going to church with Aspen was out of the question, so I ended up attending church at Bethel with my family. Dad could tell I was upset, and he kept trying to cheer me up. It was super annoying. Halfway through the service I got up and walked out. I couldn't take another one of Dad's triumphant smiles. So, he'd won. Did he have to keep smashing it in my face? Just before first period, I found Destiny switching out books at her locker. She looked up and saw me walking toward her. My mouth set into a determined line. Finally, after spending the entire weekend in agony, I could set things straight. Destiny. I need to talk to you. She glanced at me for a moment, and then, as though she were casually ripping my heart from my chest, she stared at the crowd behind me like I was invisible. She turned and wove through the students, putting people between us. Before I knew it, she had vanished from sight. Did it even matter how hard I was trying to get through to her? She hadn't replied to any of my texts, even when I'd told her that I loved her. Did you just see that? Raven Tosh said to my left. She has a lot of nerve rejecting a guy like him, Jesse Larson said. Did they break up again? Wendy Ross said. I heard they were back together. My cheeks burned with humiliation as the rest of their conversation was drowned out in the chatter of the crowd. After Bible, I stepped out into the hallway and saw Destiny, Hannah, and Shanice walking with their backs to me. I pushed through the crowd to get closer, so I could talk to Destiny. I'm so mad at him right now, Hannah vented. Hannah was still mad at me? What had Destiny said to her? Me, too. We should do something to get even, Shanice plotted. No, Destiny sounded exhausted. Fighting back will only make it worse. The person we should take down is Will, Hannah said icily. According to Isaac, it was all his idea. We're not taking anyone down. Destiny scowled. I just want to stay away from them. No. She couldn't push me away. I had to tell her how I felt, or I would explode. I pushed through the crowd to confront Destiny, but the editor of the school newspaper came around the corner and started asking me a bunch of questions about when we could get together for my upcoming interview in next month's issue. I glanced over his shoulder hopelessly as Destiny and her friends walked away. I made one last attempt to talk to her at lunch. I walked into the room with my lunch tray and started toward the table where Hannah and Destiny were sitting with Evan, Shanice, and Hudson. Destiny glanced over her shoulder at me, darted her eyes away, and said, Hannah, tell him to go away. I can't even look at him. Okay, now I was mad. I'd done everything I could to make amends to her. She couldn't even respond to my texts when I was pouring out my heart and soul. She was such a nice queen. Then Hannah turned around and gave me this nasty glare that said, don't even think about coming over here. Et tu brute? Destiny had poisoned Hannah against me, too? All of a sudden, it felt like everyone in the lunchroom was staring at me standing in the middle of the room looking completely lost and rejected. I swallowed thickly. A group of girls surrounded me like a swarm of butterflies. Isaac. You should come sit with us. Raven said. I gave one last glance at Destiny, and she stared back coldly. Evelyn, the cute blonde junior class president, smiled at me like I was the sexiest man alive. I shrugged bitterly. If that's what Destiny really wanted. A guy could only try so many times to make things right, couldn't he? As we walked from the lunchroom, Evelyn said goodbye, and I ended up behind Destiny and her friends again. Destiny, if it's too hard for you to sing with Isaac today, I can talk to Mr. Bird to see if he can postpone it, Hannah said. Destiny considered this for a moment, but before she answered, Hudson interjected, what's going on with y'all and Isaac? Why didn't you want him to sit with us? Destiny dumped him, Hannah said. Hannah and I really needed to have a little chat to set some things straight. Whose side was she on, anyway? So, Destiny's available now? Hudson asked. Oh, if he even tried. I would. I would what? There was nothing I could do. Destiny could make her own choices. Even though it hurt like Hades, I wasn't going to be the jealous ex, sabotaging every relationship she ever wanted to get into. No. Definitely not. Destiny said. I am so not available. I released a tense breath. Well, that was good to know. Sorry I asked, Hudson muttered. She means no offense, Hudson. She's just really beat up over the breakup. It was pretty ugly, Hannah said. I know how that can be. My girlfriend dumped me last year, and it sucked. Majorly, Hudson said. I wanted to slash her tires, but I didn't. That's good to know. Destiny cringed. We're going to do something to get revenge on Isaac for what he did to her. You in? Shanice said. Whoa. Revenge? What did he do? Hudson asked. Destiny overheard Will Green telling Dr. Robinson that Isaac was only dating Destiny to dig up dirt on the Mormons. Hannah balled up her fists like she was trying to keep from punching something. What a jerk, Hudson said. Yeah, let's get him for what he did. Please, don't go slashing anyone's tires, Destiny pled. Shanice and I. He waved a finger between them. We'll think of something else. I was about to pull the little punk aside and tell him to leave me alone, when Destiny said, seriously? I don't care about revenge. I just want him to leave me alone. I don't want anyone to try to kick me out. They'd better not, Shanice said. Because that would be messed up. You didn't hear Dr. Robinson when he was talking to Will. He said something about finding a way to get the Mormons to leave the school. What? Hannah exclaimed. Are you serious? Evan said. I don't know what I'd do if you left. Hannah exclaimed. And it would all be because of my stupid uncle. I clenched my jaw. I couldn't help but agree. Man, sometimes I really hate this place, Hudson said. These people need to realize we live in the 21st century. The stuff they come up with is ridiculous. I'm with you, Evan said. All the way. Hannah reached out and hugged Destiny. I'm sorry all this is happening to you, she said. Even though I get busy with Evan and school and Les Mis, I'm always here for you if you need me. Thanks, Hannah. I walked past and moved into the chapel for Primus. I found a seat in the choir loft and sat morosely by myself. Jessie Larson edged her way onto the pew about 15 feet from me. I glanced over at her. She was staring at me with her mouth twisted into a self-satisfied smile. Destiny and Hannah filed into the pew in front of us about 10 feet from Jessie. Jessie stood with her hands on her hips and said, "See? It's just like I told you at homecoming. Just a bag of garbage thrown to the curb." What? She'd said that to Destiny at homecoming? No wonder Destiny had been so upset. I'd thought it was just about the punch being dumped down the front of her dress, but now I was realizing there was much more to that conversation than I'd realized. Destiny's eyes grew distant, and she angled her face away from Jessie like she hadn't heard her, but as I studied the rigid way she held her shoulders, I realized that definitely wasn't the case. What's that supposed to mean? Hannah said, going into attack mode. She had her hands on her hips, mirroring Jessie's posture, and her eyes were on fire. Isn't it obvious? It means that Isaac came to his senses, Jessie replied with a snort. She dumped him, you malicious witch, Hannah said. Ouch. Just shove it in my face already. Thanks a lot, Hannah. You weren't even there, Jessie, Aspen said, rolling her eyes. You didn't see how she treated him. He was trying to apologize, and she wouldn't listen. Aspen turned her frozen blue eyes on me. From what I hear, she still won't accept his apology. You know, Destiny, in the Bible, it says we should forgive. The Bible also says you shouldn't judge. So, maybe you should take your judging but someplace else, Hannah retorted. Aspen looked down her nose at Hannah but turned and moved across the room to talk to Sydney. Mr. Bird came into the room shortly after the hour and said, "Sorry I'm late. After some of the events of the past weekend, I feel that it would be the most beneficial if we go back to the beginning of the musical and start over." Destiny relaxed visibly, and I suddenly understood why. Today, Destiny and I were scheduled to sing A Little Fall of Rain, the scene where Eponine and Marius sing as she lays in his arms dying. Hannah must have told him about our breakup. Great. Singing that song with Destiny might have been my best chance of rekindling things with her. If we were starting again from the beginning, we probably wouldn't get around to singing it again for months, especially with Christmas coming up. Who knows what our relationship will be like by then? Chapter 4, Destiny. It was starting to get too cold to enjoy the treehouse, but I was determined to still make it out there. At first, I just brought out a heavy coat, but as the temperatures dropped, I eventually brought out a sleeping bag as well. After my homework was finished, a lot of times I'd read my scriptures or sit and think. Olivia called it moping. I claimed I was pondering life. One day, a few days before Thanksgiving, I was in the treehouse, and Preston called up to me. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. You insist on still using that rope like when you were a kid?" Of course. I laughed, threw it down to him, and watched as he climbed up hand over hand. "I brought you something," he said, sliding his backpack off once he'd climbed up. I couldn't believe he'd climbed the rope while wearing that thing. "What did you bring me?" He set his backpack on the floor between his feet, unzipped it, and pulled out 2 thermoses, his hair falling into his eyes as he leaned forward. "Hot chocolate?" I asked hopefully. Yep. It's the mint kind, he said, sweeping his hair back from his eyes. I grinned. He'd remembered it was my favorite. You know, you're totally nuts to be out here in this weather, he said with a teasing smile. I thought you were the one who said the cold was invigorating, I teased. His smile vanished. It is. For me. He regarded me seriously. But I don't think you come out here because you feel that way. What do you mean? I asked. I think you come out here to punish yourself. Punish myself? It kind of made sense. I carried a heavy load of guilt concerning my relationship with Isaac. I'd broken a lot of rules and had really pulled away from my friends and family. Maybe you should take up a more productive pastime. Try something like poetry. I rolled my eyes. That wasn't supposed to be a joke. I think it could help you. Not likely. There wasn't much that could help me. I'll think about it, I said, mostly to keep from hurting his feelings. I sipped the hot, creamy liquid and sighed as it warmed me. Preston's family came over for Thanksgiving dinner. Grandma and Grandpa were spending it with Dad's sister in Ohio, and Mom wanted to take some of the pressure off of Preston's mom, since her depression had been pretty rough lately. After our big dinner, Olivia and I were poring over the Black Friday ads with Brinley and Megan, and the guys were watching football. The younger kids were all crowded in Brianna's room playing board games. The house smelled like warm pumpkin pie, and there was Christmas music playing in the room where Mom and Sister Nelson were making wreaths. Are you guys doing anything fun for Christmas? Megan asked. Not really, I said. Dad muted the TV for the commercial and glanced over at us. Actually, I was just talking to your mom about an idea, he said to me. He glanced back at Preston's dad. I was thinking your family might want to come along as well. Oh yeah? Preston's dad glanced over with interest. My parents called to wish me a happy Thanksgiving earlier today, and they let me know that there's been a last-minute cancellation at their cabin for the weekend of Christmas. They decided to gift the weekend to us as part of our Christmas present rather than trying to fill it at the last minute. That's awesome. Olivia jumped out of her seat. She turned to Brinley. My grandparents own this huge cabin up in the Smoky Mountains, and they rent it out for extra money and stuff. Y'all should come. That would be the best Christmas ever. Please, Dad. Can we do it? Brinley asked. I'll have to talk to your mother, but I don't see why not, Brother Nelson said. I might spend Christmas with Preston in a cabin? I didn't see that coming. The next few weeks flew by. Isaac and I continued to avoid each other. I spent more time in the treehouse with Preston. Sometimes he'd find me up there, and he'd bring his homework with him. After about a week of that, it became a regular thing. I would have thought someone would say something, especially my parents, but either they didn't notice Preston's truck or they thought he was hanging out with Michael. If they suspected something was going on between us, they didn't say a word to me about it. Honestly, I wasn't so sure what was going on between us. Preston came to do homework with me, but he wasn't super talkative. He just kind of showed up, telling me he didn't think I should have to be all alone. Part of me wanted him to leave, but this other part kept me from showing it. It was the part that needed him near me, like a pillar of strength. It needed him to stay, so I wouldn't break apart again. The days Preston didn't come, I couldn't focus on homework. Instead, I stared out the treehouse window listlessly. Sometimes my mind would drift to him, like an unsuspecting fly to a light bulb. I'd hover close to the thought of him, only to get too close and get burned again as I remembered. And the pain was terrible. Agonizingly so. I'd been shoved under deep black water and told that I'd never be able to resurface. Where were my gills? Maybe in the future, I'd learn to grow some, but before that time came, each breath would be either raw or numb, depending on the moment. Every day, walking past him in the hall was torture. Whenever he returned one of Evelyn's persistent smiles, the pain ached inside me. Oh, how I wished she would leave him alone. But even if she were to go away, another girl would come. And then another. Every night, sometimes for hours, I begged God to erase the desire, the anger, and the pain from my heart. Occasionally, a tiny moment of clarity and relief came. But the next morning, the instant I saw him, I was plunged back into the water, and the debilitating chasm of nothingness threatened to drown me again. And then there were the dreams. Some were snapshots taken from our past. We played paintball, sang our duet at Hannah's house, or stargazed on his land while I ran my hands through his hair. Each dream was so real, so vivid. When I woke from them, they left me gasping with the knowledge that I would never have those moments again. But those were the good dreams. The nightmares brought a pain so unspeakable that I withdrew into a sullen state of silence for the rest of the day. Those days scared Michael. He was so amazing and supportive. He tried to get me to talk to him about what I was feeling, but I usually ended up telling him I was fine or I made up excuses. I didn't want him to worry about me. Hannah made several efforts to cheer me up. But it was obvious that she wanted to focus on Evan. No matter how hard they tried, no one could pull me from the dark, frozen depths that had captured me. Except for Preston. Somehow, while he sat with me in the tree house as our pens scratched across our papers, the iceberg around my heart began to thaw. It never vanished completely, but melted enough to allow small, sporadic moments of laughter. Even if those fleeting moments of happiness didn't warm my heart completely, they pulled me into the sunshine just enough to carry on, one foot in front of the other. Midterms were over and Christmas break was upon us, and the Nelsons and our family caravanned up to the Smoky Mountains. I sat in the backseat of our Suburban, staring out the window at the cars we were passing on the interstate. For the next 2 weeks, I was free from enduring Isaac's presence. I should be relieved, right? Wrong. Being away from him made everything worse. When I was at school, I could at least see him. There was this little back corner of my mind that still fantasized that he'd come back to me. And somehow, he would realize that what he'd done was wrong, and on bended knee, he'd beg me to forgive him. And I would graciously agree. But he'd stopped caring. He hadn't even attempted to talk to me in weeks, which only reinforced my belief that he'd never truly wanted me in the first place. Jealous rage sliced through me. He'd replaced me with Evelyn just as quickly as he'd replaced Aspen with me. Except, I'd had such a short time with him, he probably didn't even remember that we'd even been together. I'd never hated and loved someone so much in my entire life. But it had to stop. This trip was my chance for a fresh start on life. We arrived at the cabin with the Nelsons pulling up just behind us. The mountains loomed over us, and there was snow on the ground scattered with melted patches so that the field before us looked like a Dalmatian with spots across its back. I had to wait for everyone else to leave before I could get out, and by the time I was out, Preston was already stepping out of his family's van, stretching his arms behind him. I couldn't help but stare. He was awfully beautiful sometimes, and it came through at the strangest moments. One minute he was being a bit annoying and sarcastic, the next he was doing something like stretching outside his family's minivan, looking like a Greek god. Truthfully, I hadn't seen his annoying side in a long time. Not since my breakup. So far, he'd just been, well, awesome. He turned and saw me staring at him, and a corner of his mouth pulled upward in a friendly way. So, we heard on the weather report on the drive up that they're expecting more snow here. It was cute how excited he always got whenever there was even the slightest chance of snow. I think it had something to do with his early years spent in Utah playing in the snow every winter. Really? Brianna squeaked. We haven't had any real snow in forever. Well, they get a lot more snow up here than we do, Preston said, lifting the hatch on the back of his mom's minivan. He slung a couple of pink backpacks, a princess pillow, and 2 sleeping bags onto one arm, and with the other he grabbed 2 more backpacks and began heading toward the cabin. Inside it was huge and clean, but desperately in need of a renovation. We helped our parents unload the rest of our luggage and discussed where everyone was going to sleep. Mom and Sister Nelson decided that the guys should take one half of the cabin, and the girls should take the other half, with the parents sharing the two largest bedrooms. I piled my stuff next to the bed I was sharing with Megan and went outside to see what everyone else was doing. Preston was standing on the porch looking out at the expanse before us. Far off in the distance there were fields with horses and sheep, and beyond that, there was an old, white brick house that looked as though it dated back to the Civil War. "Wanna go check out the horses?" Preston asked, a hand tucked into a pocket of his dark wash jeans. "I'd love to," I said. As we passed the cars, Michael poked his head out of the Suburban with his backpack slung over his shoulder. "Where are y'all going?" Preston told him, and for a moment, I thought Michael would say he wanted to come with us, but something strange flashed across his face, and in the end, all he said was, "Awesome. Have fun." We trudged through the snow, and I listened to the muffled way it crunched under my feet, breaking the perfect silence. "How was your drive up?" he asked. I shrugged. "It was fine, I guess," I said, trying not to dwell on the fact that I'd thought way too much about Isaac. "Well, ours was horrible. One of the twins got carsick and threw up, and Anna whined about the smell for the rest of the trip." I couldn't help but giggle. "Sorry, I know I shouldn't be laughing." He glanced sideways at me and grinned. "Oh, I see how it is. You think my misery's funny? It's just nice to know I'm not the only one getting tortured in the car by annoying little brothers and sisters." He laughed. "That's what iPods are for." "True story," I said, nodding. We followed the gravel driveway that led to the old Civil War farmhouse. Preston walked up to the barbed wire fence and whistled to the horses. One of them perked up his ears and trotted over to us. Preston put his hand out, and the horse nuzzled it like he expected a carrot. When the horse didn't find anything, he turned away disinterestedly. "We should have brought him a snack," I said. "We'll just have to come back tomorrow," Preston said. "Definitely," I said. "You seem much happier today," Preston observed. "You tend to have that effect on me," I replied. "I'm glad. Sometimes it seems like I'm not getting through to you." His green eyes focused intently on me. "Are you kidding? Everything that happened with Isaac would have been so much harder if it hadn't been for you. You've been really distant, so it's hard for me to tell what you're thinking," he explained. "Preston, there were so many days that I'd be in the treehouse, not knowing how I could face another minute of life, and the next thing I knew, you're down there calling out to me. And even when I wouldn't say much, you never gave up. You just kept coming." I looked out across the snowy field. "It's still so hard. Every day." He studied my face and his mouth formed a serious, thin line, but his eyes were compassionate. "Sometimes it just aches." There were moments when I could joke around with Preston. During those short times, I'd forget for a while. But then, as soon as there was a lull in the conversation or he left my side, the iceberg would harden up again. He put an arm around my shoulder and pulled me close to him until my cheek rested against his shoulder. I breathed in the smell of his leather jacket, and some of the ice slowly melted away. "But the good news is, I won't have to see him for another 2 weeks," I said. "We're going to have fun this week, and I'm not going to wallow in my misery." Preston held me for a moment, and we gazed out across the field, watching the horses pawing at the ground as they looked for grass to eat in the bare patches of ground. As I felt his arm encircling me, I thought back to the time we were walking to the paintball field, and he'd put his arm around me. I'd been so focused on not giving Isaac the wrong impression about my fake relationship with Preston that I hadn't thought about how Preston must have felt. My cheeks burned. I'd been so awful to him. Then I thought about how I'd put his name in my phone to hide the fact that I was still dating Isaac. I'd used him to get to Isaac repeatedly, and all he'd ever done to deserve it was give me his undivided attention. If he ever knew how I'd used him, he'd be so hurt. All I ever did was mope about my sad life and whine about how my ex-boyfriend had betrayed me. And yet Preston kept coming back. What had I ever done to deserve him? After dinner, back at the cabin, Michael and Preston were building a fire together in the huge stone fireplace. Preston bent over the hearth, reaching back and forth as he added sticks to the cold fireplace. I couldn't help noticing the way his shirt clung to his shoulders as he worked. A stray lock of his wavy blonde hair fell forward and he shoved it back distractedly, his eyes focused on the small flames he'd just kindled. He really was beautiful. Within minutes, a cozy fire blazed, warming the room. Chapter 5, Preston. I looked up from the hearth and felt Destiny's eyes on me. Our eyes met, and she blushed and looked away. Was I imagining it, or was she checking me out just now? Well, that was new. Maybe there was hope, yet. And she hadn't pushed me away when I'd put my arm around her today. I'd been a little hesitant to do it at first, but it felt right at the time. For the past few weeks, I'd kept expecting her to push me away or to somehow forgive him and go back to him, but she hadn't so far. Every time I'd come to her treehouse, I'd wondered if it would be the day she'd turn me away. She still thought about him constantly. She'd get this faraway look in her eyes, and then the sadness would overtake her all over again. I felt myself being pulled toward her, but at the same time she was so broken and fragile. It was clear that she still wanted him. At any time she could wave me away and decide she was willing to take him back. It was what kept me from kissing her when I'd had so many opportunities. That and sheer terror. But that didn't mean I didn't think about kissing her. I did. A lot. Destiny was addicted to chapstick. She was always putting it on, and every time she did, it was like she was begging me to kiss her by drawing attention to her lips. And she wore these flavors that smelled like dessert. Talk about torture. Speaking of chapstick, she was pulling a tube of it out of her jacket pocket right now and running it all over her lips. Oh dude, don't look. I turned back to the fire and busied myself with rearranging one of the logs, even though it was roaring cheerfully and wouldn't need attention for a while. Just then, the twins ran through the room chasing Brianna, who was squealing gleefully. Both of them had it bad for her. They were always getting into these lengthy arguments over who would end up marrying her one day. I couldn't blame them. She was a carbon copy of what Destiny had been like when I first met her. Destiny twisted around, smiling at them as they ran past. It was good to see her smiling again. There was something magical about this cabin. I wasn't sure if it was the Christmas tree set up in the corner, or the fact that it was filled with our closest friends, but it definitely felt special. Destiny could probably sense it, too. It would explain her lighter mood since we'd arrived. The next morning, Michael and I woke up to Elijah and the twins screeching something about snow. I rolled over and groaned but sat up to see how much snow we'd gotten. I peered out the window, and sure enough, there was at least 6 inches, and it was still coming down. I grinned. You know what this means, right? I asked Michael. Snowball fight, he said, returning my grin. Heck yes, I said, climbing out of bed. I hadn't seen this much snow since my last visit to Utah 2 winters ago. I rifled through my bag, grabbing my toothbrush and the clothes I planned to wear for the day. I was lucky enough to actually find the bathroom open. Not sure how I achieved that since I'd waited a full hour to get 5 minutes in the bathroom last night. After getting dressed and brushing my teeth, I slung my leather jacket over my arm and headed to the kitchen to scrounge up some food. Good morning, Destiny said from beside the kitchen table. Hungry? She was chopping green onions and bell peppers. When am I not hungry? I asked with a grin. Whatcha making? Omelets, Megan answered from beside Sister Clark, who was standing at the stove. The first one's about to come off the skillet right now. Want it? Sister Clark asked. I glanced over and noticed Mom lying on the couch by the fire. Mom, have you eaten yet? She nodded. How are you feeling this morning? I asked. She'd gotten so much weaker lately. I woke up with a massive headache, she said, pressing a hand to her forehead. I'm worried about you, Megan said. You look really pale. I'm fine, Mom insisted. Why don't you go back to bed? I suggested. I need to be out here to help supervise the kids, she said. I'll help get them breakfast and take them outside to play, I promised. Just go get some rest. She nodded and returned to her room. I turned to see Destiny watching me with a pensive look. Megan and I helped the rest of the younger kids get ready to eat breakfast. By the time they'd all finished up and I'd helped clear the dishes, the kids were bouncing up and down, bursting at the seams, wanting to go play in the snow. Who wants to have a massive snowball war? I bellowed, throwing my arms into the air. The twins went berserk, and even Brinley and Olivia looked interested. I glanced over at Destiny and said, "You coming?" "Of course," she said. "Like I'd pass up another chance to take you down." My mouth quirked up into a smile again. Now that was the Destiny I knew so well. "You wish." "I don't wish." "I know," she said. "PSH whatever." I seriously couldn't wait to see her covered from head to foot in snow. 15 minutes later, we all congregated on the porch. We split up into 2 teams and left to scout out the best places to set up our headquarters. Olivia, Brinley, and I were on a team together with the twins and Anna, while Michael, Megan, Destiny, Elijah, and Brianna were on the other team. We picked a spot behind a rusty shed next to a small stand of trees. Michael's team chose a spot behind a gigantic fallen log. "Okay, guys, start making snowballs and stockpile them over behind the shed," I said. I gazed across the field to where Destiny and Megan were scooping up snow and rolling it into balls. As I looked, I noticed the snow had stopped falling. I bent down and began forming my own pile of snowballs in a series of rapid movements. Before long, we'd cleared out all the snow in the general area, and we had to move out to farther ground to find more snow. When we had a good-sized pile, I said, "Okay, guys, that's good enough. Let's go hit them with a surprise attack." "Yar," the twins roared. "So much for the surprise." Michael looked up and pointed Elijah in our direction. "Charge!" I commanded, and we flew forward with armfuls of snowballs. Our 2 forces collided, and snow exploded around us like a full-blown blizzard. I lunged for Destiny and threw a snowball that splattered across her arm. Her eyes grew wide as she looked down at her arm, her brow set in determination as she pelted me with 5 snowballs in a row. They slammed against my chest, my shoulders, my back, and right smack on my cheek. "Dang," I said, rubbing the snow off my face. "Don't mess with Destiny." "That's right," she said, with her arms crossed and her chin thrust out. But her eyes were twinkling. We were out of snowballs, so we had to go back to our piles to restock. Then we were all back on the field, colliding in a flurry of white. I hit Destiny right above her ear with a huge snowball. She shrieked a feminine war cry and clobbered me with 2 snowballs, one on either side of my face. My cheeks stung with the cold, and I ran back to the fort to get more snowballs. As I was reaching down behind the shed to restock my supply of ammo, Destiny barreled into me, knocking me off balance. Her arms wrapped around me, and we fell into the snow on my side. I struggled to break free, but she had me pinned at a strange angle. Technically, I could have thrown her off at any time, but that would have ruined the fun. I howled as she shoved snow down the back of my shirt, and we rolled several times down the slope as I struggled to get free. But her arms were locked around my neck. And then, somehow, she was pinned under me. Every vein in my body was on fire as I gazed into her crystal-clear blue eyes. She released her arms from her vice-like hold on my neck. Her eyes grew wide and her lips parted slightly as though she'd just realized how close our faces were. I had no idea what possessed me to do it, or when all reason had suddenly flown from my mind. But as I leaned forward and kissed her tenderly, all I could think about was how beautiful and pure she'd looked lying there in the snow with her hair splayed all around her in wild waves of perfection. Honestly, if I'd stopped to think about what I was about to do, I never would have been able to go through with it. I mean, come on, how many years had I imagined what it would be like to kiss Destiny Clark? But that had always been pure fantasy. Especially after her nasty breakup. If I'd taken the time to consider kissing her, I would have convinced myself that the last thing she'd wanted was a kiss. As my lips met hers, Destiny froze under me, shocked. At first, I thought she was going to push me off or slap me in the face, but after a moment, her body relaxed beneath me and, miracle of miracles, she wrapped her arms around my torso and pulled me in even closer. Her cold nose brushed mine, and her breath was warm on my mouth as she exhaled. Her lips were amazingly soft as she moved them over mine, and she tasted like vanilla frosted cupcakes. It didn't matter that there was melted snow dripping down my back or that I couldn't feel my toes anymore. I finally had her arms around me, and she had just kissed me back. My legs could be broken at this point, and it wouldn't matter. She pulled away and looked up at me, her liquid blue eyes vulnerable. I vowed in that moment to do everything I could to cherish and protect her. Her bottom lip trembled, and she bit it as a shudder ran through her. She was thinking of him. Somehow, I could tell. I sat up and looked away. How could I have been such an idiot? She obviously wasn't ready for another relationship. I'd acted out of selfishness and desire for one thoughtless moment, and it would probably cost her countless days of pain and confusion. I'd wanted to protect her, but instead, I was the person inflicting the pain. I should have known her feelings were still too raw to handle something this serious. Chapter 6, Destiny. I gazed up into Preston's green eyes, and a shudder ran through me. I totally hadn't seen that kiss coming. But wow. Seriously. Just wow. Who knew Preston Nelson was such an amazing kisser? My head was spinning as he pulled apart from me and sat up. His eyes shifted away from me, and I suspected the redness in his cheeks wasn't just from the cold. This wasn't going to make everything awkward between us, was it? Because, honestly, I couldn't afford to lose him. But before I could tell him that, the twins came around the corner of the shed and screeched. Get her. She took Preston down. They pelted me with snowballs, AIEING, like a couple of Native American braves. I scrambled onto my side to grab some snow into balls, but it was too late, I was toast. The rest of Preston's team came around the corner and bombarded me as well. Guys, back off. Preston said. Give her some room to breathe. He stood and grasped my hand, helping me up off the ground. I stood and gazed into his eyes. They were full of concern and something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. Regret? Guilt? Fear? Was he having second thoughts about kissing me? Well, I wasn't having any regrets. In fact, I was kind of wishing he'd do it again. I'm freezing. I couldn't feel my feet anymore. Hot tub? Brinley chimed. Yes. Olivia said. That sounds amazing, I said. You guys coming? I turned to Michael and Preston. I think Preston's jaw dropped a little. Sure, I'm in, Michael said. Preston didn't say anything but followed us back to the cabin. Once I was back in the room I shared with Megan, I put on my little, yellow, polka-dotted tankini. I twisted my hair up into a ballerina bun and wrapped my pink and black zebra-striped beach towel around myself. Preston used to swim with us all the time when he was younger, but last summer he'd been so busy mowing lawns he hadn't swam with us even once. That was why when I'd seen him shirtless last it was such a shock to me. His body had changed so much since 2 summers ago when I'd last seen him shirtless. He used to be such a scrawny kid. But now? He was absolutely drool-worthy. And that was last fall. Since then, he'd only bulked up more. Olivia and Brinley came into our room with their towels wrapped around them. You guys ready to go? Brinley asked. Yep, Megan said. Preston and Michael met us in the kitchen where the sliding glass door led to the back porch. Preston had on a navy BYU t-shirt and the silver athletic shorts he was wearing the day we'd stolen his underwear. The twins ran out in their swimsuits, but Mom stopped them. "Where do y'all think you're going? You're still too young for the hot tub." "No fair," the twins said in unison. "Rules are rules. You know we don't let you in the hot tub at our place either. Not until you're 12. Personally, I thought the rule was kind of dumb, but Mom was a big stickler for the rules. But who was I to complain? That was two less kids to splash me in the face. Michael slid open the glass door, and we stepped out. As soon as the frigid air hit us, Brinley and Olivia shrieked, and we scrambled across the deck to the hot tub. They jumped in together, before anyone else. I kicked off my flip-flops, draped my towel over the deck railing, and dipped my foot into the scalding hot water. I looked up just in time to see Preston peel off his shirt. Holy freaking cow! A flush crept up into my face. His arms were massive, his chest was chiseled, and his abs could keep my clothes clean. Can I say yum? My heartbeat flew into overdrive. I was staring at him openly. I knew I was, but I couldn't take my eyes off of him. And he noticed, too. How did I know this? Well, it was pretty easy to tell, because he was staring right back at me like a starving man looking at a feast placed before him. Chapter 7, Preston. Destiny and I locked eyes, and I felt my entire body heat up despite the freezing air biting at my bare skin. She was beautiful standing there in her yellow swimsuit with one foot in the hot tub, her skin flawless and creamy. She lowered into the water, breaking the spell, and Megan climbed into the hot tub after her. What was I thinking coming out here? How could I stay just friends with her when she looked at me like that? She may think that this was going somewhere, but there was no way she was ready for another relationship. What if I did something stupid to her and ruined everything and broke her heart all over again? I almost did earlier in the snow, and I wasn't going to be stupid enough to do it again. There were two open spots in the hot tub. One was next to Destiny, and the other was on the opposite corner from her, about as far as I could get from her. I let Michael climb in before me, thinking he'd take the spot closer to Destiny. But he didn't. He took the spot next to Megan and Brinley. I climbed in after him, grateful for the excuse of the steamy water to explain my red face, in case anyone noticed. No one seemed to. They were too busy joking around and playfully splashing each other. "Hey, are you okay?" Destiny asked me. "Huh? You seem kind of quiet." "Me?" "Yeah, you." She nudged my knee with hers underneath the water. I ran my fingers through my hair, wetting the unruly waves down. I was far from okay. I was trying to forget about that kiss, but it was all I could think about, and now she was sitting inches away from me in a swimsuit. "Hey," she said, reaching for my arm. "Talk to me." Her fingers trailed down my arm beneath the surface, sending electrical jolts through me. This was incredibly hard. More than anything, I wanted to take her in my arms and kiss her again, but I couldn't risk hurting her. "We can talk about it later if you want," she whispered, her face dangerously close to mine. And just like that, she turned back to Olivia and splashed her in the face. Megan and Olivia started whispering and then teamed up to dunk Michael under. When he came back up, a full-blown water fight broke out, and we all joined in. Sister Clark slid open the door. "Y'all need to calm down out here. Either get out or stop with the water fight. You're going to splash water all over the deck, and it's going to freeze over and break someone's neck." "Yes, ma'am," Michael said. "Sorry about that, Mom." She slid the door closed again, and Megan and Brinley started whispering again, this time with Olivia and Michael as well. I figured they were all just going to start something else, to somehow circumvent the no water fight rule, and I prepared myself to be ambushed. But instead, Brinley said, "Hey, let's go get some hot chocolate." And they all agreed and left one by one until Destiny and I were alone. I was too stunned to leave. They were trying to set us up? Didn't they realize she didn't want to get back in a relationship so soon? She had told me so herself. She'd been very clear about it. Hadn't she told them? They were her closest friends. Destiny didn't seem to mind at all. She turned toward me and smiled. So? Can we talk now? I was in so much trouble. Sure. I swallowed. Tell me what's going on. You kiss me, and now you're acting all weird. I don't want this for us, Preston. Neither did I, but I couldn't see a way around it. I'm sorry about earlier. I acted on impulse, and I was totally out of line. Don't apologize for that. You were okay with it? Did I ever give any kind of sign that I wasn't? No, I said, my voice trailing off. But you said yourself you didn't want to get into another relationship, and I didn't honor your wishes. Her face grew thoughtful. I can understand that, I guess, but right now what I need more than anything is to move on. And I can't do that until I forget him, she said, getting on her knees on the ledge in front of me and inching closer. Who better to help me forget than you? She rested her hands against my bare chest, electrifying my skin with her touch. I need you to help me forget. Right now. She trailed her hands up my arms and over my shoulders like she was on a mission to explore the contours of my body. She wrapped her hands around my neck. Now her face was inches from me, and her eyes were locked on mine. She wanted to forget him? Oh, she was going to. She was going to forget the guy even had a name. Okay. I'll help you, I murmured. Just remember, you're the one who asked for this. I finally allowed myself to touch her. I wrapped my arms around her waist and pulled her in closer. And then my lips were on hers. I kissed her the way I really wanted to. All the desire I'd been holding back for the past hour, for the past several years, actually flowed into the kiss. Her lips moved in perfect synchrony with mine, soft, yet firm, at the right moments. She pulled away, resting her forehead against mine, sighing in satisfaction. I drew her torso closer. Her body fit perfectly against mine, like she was specifically crafted for me. We pulled apart, and I gazed into her eyes, my head spinning. Just then the sliding glass door opened, and Sister Clark called out to us, "Hey, you two, how about you come inside for some hot chocolate, too?" She'd tried to keep her voice light, but I didn't miss the slight undertone of disapproval she must have felt at seeing us out here alone together. Little did she know. Chapter 8, Destiny. A few days after Christmas, Preston and I were hanging out in the treehouse again. A tinkling melody filled the chilly air in the treehouse. Preston reached into his back pocket and yanked out his phone. "Hey, Dad. I'm over at the Clarks right now." Preston's face paled, and he sat forward a bit. "Oh no." I studied Preston's face with the hope that it might reveal some bit of information. "Yeah, I'm heading home right now," he said, scrambling to his feet. "Yeah, I'll see you in just a few. Bye." He crammed the phone back into his pocket and twisted to look at me. "What's wrong?" His eyes had a haunted look in them. "My mom got her results back from the doctor today. Dad's calling the family together so she can tell us all in person." That doesn't sound good. Dread settled into the pit of my stomach. He put a hand to his brow and inhaled jaggedly. "What'll we do if we lose her?" "I'm so sorry," I said. "I'll pray for your family." "Thanks," he said from over his shoulder as he jogged down the stairs to the dried leaves below. That night, while we were doing the dinner dishes, the house phone rang. "Hello?" Mom answered. Suddenly, the only sound in the room was the water running. Mom covered her mouth with a hand and squeezed her eyes shut. Fat tears rolled down her cheeks. I stopped rinsing the food from the pot I was scrubbing and turned the water off. "Yeah, I'm still here," she said, blinking back tears. She glanced over her shoulder at our curious faces. She turned away from us and scurried into the formal dining room and shut the door. Olivia and I exchanged a somber look and went back to doing the dishes. 5 minutes later, Mom came out of the dining room with a tear-stained face. "What's wrong, Mom?" Brianna asked. Mom looked at Brianna like she was considering sending her away on an errand or changing the subject, but in the end, she simply said, "Sister Nelson is very sick." "What do you mean?" Olivia asked, her voice tight. "Her cancer's back." I turned around, fear slamming into my chest. I'd suspected as much, but I'd hoped it wasn't true. "That's horrible," Olivia said. "What are they going to do?" "They're going to put her on chemo, but the doctor said it didn't look good. Out of 4 stages, she's at stage 3. Mom slumped into a chair at the kitchen table. This wasn't just some lady from church. Preston's mom was her best friend. "Are they still coming over for New Year's Eve?" Olivia asked. "I don't know." She rubbed her temples. "They probably won't be feeling up to it." "I hate cancer," Brianna declared, storming from the room. "I think we can all agree to that," Michael called from the family room. "I'm going over to Preston's." He jumped out of his chair. "I'm going with you," I said. "Me, too." Olivia threw the dish rag into the sink. "No," Mom raised her head, her eyes firm. "You 3, stay here. Give their family some time to sort through this together. If you want to contact them, send a text so they can reply on their own terms." She pointed a finger to the sink. "Anyway, there are dishes to be done." She put her head back in her hands morosely. "Mom," I asked. "Are you okay?" Without a word, she got up, went to her bedroom with slumped shoulders, and shut the door. After finishing the dishes, Michael, Olivia, and I sent texts, and the younger kids made cards for their friends. Later that night, I felt tense. If I wasn't able to see the Nelsons soon, I'd explode. I trudged back to my bedroom and flopped onto my bed. Olivia was digging through her closet. "What are you doing?" "I just have to clean something right now." Over her shoulder, a red ballet flat flew out of her closet. She hadn't worn those shoes for about 3 years. It landed on a heap of shoes she'd found from the depths of her closet. "You're cleaning out your closet?" "Yep," she said, tossing out a teddy bear I hadn't seen since 7th grade. I'd sent individual texts to Megan, Preston, and Sister Nelson, but it didn't feel like enough. More than anything, I wished I could be there for Preston like he'd been there for me when my heart was broken. I couldn't imagine the pain he was in. Feeling helpless, I pulled out a pen and notebook and began writing poetry like Preston had suggested. It was surprising how easily the words flowed from me. Powerful similes and metaphors wove themselves into the rhyming lines. That night, I wrote a poem about mothers and how they sacrifice for their families. The next day was December 30th. Mom was out grocery shopping, and I'd finished all my chores. I put on my heavy coat, grabbed my pen and notebook, and slipped on a pair of mud boots in the garage. I trudged through onion grass and brown crispy leaves until I reached the treehouse. I climbed the stairs and breathed a sigh of relief. I kicked off my boots and snuggled into the sleeping bag, arranging the pillow behind my back. I clicked open my pen, and this time, the words and emotions I'd been trying to suppress flowed from me explosively. First, I wrote about Preston's mom and how he must feel about her illness. Then the following poems were a bit more general. They were about grief over losing a loved one. Before I knew it, the floodgates had opened, and I was finally able to write about Isaac and the pain he'd caused, how it burned inside me like fire. I wrote about feeling alone and unwanted, lost and broken. After some time, it began raining outside, and I wrote a poem, likening the rain to my tears. Time passed, and my hand began cramping up from writing so much. I dropped my pen onto the sleeping bag and surveyed my work. I'd written 11 poems. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. All the anger, frustration, and anguish I'd felt had been taken from me and had come alive on the paper instead. Feeling rejuvenated, I returned to the house. The next day was New Year's Eve. I had 3 more days until school started again, and I'd be expected to sing during rehearsals. I hadn't practiced my music in weeks. I couldn't bear to. I pulled out the music too on my own and began playing it at the piano. I stumbled over the notes, rusty because I hadn't played for a long time, other than the occasional Sunday when they needed me to play at church. I hadn't had the heart to be around music more than necessary. I hadn't wanted to do much of anything other than sit in the treehouse and ponder life. After pounding out the song a couple of times, I started getting the hang of it enough to sing along without constantly pausing for my fingers to find the next notes. As I sang it over and over, some of the words struck me. It was about living in my own fantasy world and pining over a guy who would never love me back. It was pretty relevant, right? All this time, I'd been idolizing Eponine. I'd loved how sneaky and brave she was, how determined she was to get Marius. I'd taken everything she was and had assumed I was exactly like her. When Eponine sings On My Own, she's just been cast off from her father and feels that she's friendless and no place to go. When I discovered the truth about Isaac, I felt the same way, so alone. Suddenly, a revelation hit me. I wasn't alone. God had been there by my side the entire time, and he hadn't left me friendless. I had a family who loved and supported me. I would never forget how Olivia went out of her way to cheer me up the day my heart shattered, or how Michael put his arm around me and took me home. Hudson and Shanice had banded together to fight for me. Hannah was on my side against her own family members. Finally, I thought about Preston, how he climbed the rope, held me, stroked my hair when I cried, and brought hot chocolate when I was cold. Most of all, God had given me myself. I didn't need a guy to give me self-worth. I played and sang with power and determination, and as I did, a tiny portion of my heart stitched itself back up. "You're really good, you know," Preston said from the doorway. "Preston." Without thinking, I jumped up from the piano bench and threw my arms around him. I felt his shoulders stiffen under me, and I stepped back, suddenly bashful. "I'm sorry about your mom," I said softly. He shoved his hands in his pockets and stared away morosely. He looked like a train wreck survivor. "Hey, Destiny," Megan said. She stood in the foyer next to Brinley. "Y'all decided to still come over to celebrate?" "Yeah, Mom wants to live life as normally as she can." "Megan, I'm so sorry." "I'm still pretty much in shock, you know?" Megan said. "I can't even imagine." Sister Nelson walked into the room, a cheery smile on her face. "Hey, everyone. We brought 7-layer dip." "You brought us food?" "We should be the ones taking it to you," I said. "I'm not feeling that bad, yet." She grinned sardonically. "Just wait until my treatments start on Monday. Then you can bring me all the food you want. Mom was on the phone with someone from church this morning, signing up to bring you a few meals. Don't worry. You'll be taken care of. Brinley's already been online picking out wigs for me. We found a cute red one. What do you think, Preston? Would I look good as a redhead?" "I think you'd look awesome, Mom." He'd said it with a smile, but there was sadness in his eyes. We gorged on party food, played apples to apples, and just before midnight, we turned on the TV to watch the ball drop. As the clock struck midnight, the married couples kissed, and I sat awkwardly on the couch trying not to think too hard about Isaac and whether we'd be kissing at that very moment if we hadn't broken up. Instead, I was sitting all alone, and it stunk. Royally. As I sat there bemoaning my own little problems, I looked and saw the pain in Brother Nelson's eyes. This might be his last opportunity to kiss his wife on New Year's. After that realization, I just felt like a whiny brat. I needed to snap out of it. After toasting with Martinelli's sparkling cider, we went out to the driveway to light up the fireworks. Preston was sitting on the sidewalk with his knees brought up and his arms crossed loosely over them, his expression sullen in the glow of the outdoor lighting on our house. Not even little exploding rockets could cheer him up tonight. Throughout the night, Preston had sat apart from the group and had only spoken when someone had asked him a question directly. I'd missed him teasing me with that lopsided smile of his. I wanted to do something to cheer him up, but I couldn't figure out what. I remembered watching the fireworks when we were little kids. He was always right on his dad's heels, trying to be in the middle of the action. But for the last couple of years, the two fathers had taken a bit of a step back, letting Michael and Preston take over the majority of the production. Tonight was different, though. How much was he suffering? I ached inside as I thought about it. He was there for me when I was broken. It was time to return the favor. I wrapped my favorite silver velour blanket around my shoulders and lowered myself onto the sloping sidewalk next to him. "Hey," I said, nudging his elbow with my blanketed one. He lifted his head from between his knees, gazed at me, and grunted in acknowledgement. "Not feeling up to fireworks tonight?" I asked. "Not really. I know I should be acting happy in front of my mom, I see Megan doing it, but, I don't know, I just can't." He looked up to where Orion stood sentinel in the clear night sky. "It's okay to feel sad about your mom. Sitting here, wallowing in my sadness, feels selfish. It's making me feel guilty." "You don't have anything to feel guilty about. Everyone deals with it differently." He stared ahead vacantly. "I don't know much about all of this, but to me, you seem like you're still in shock." "Well, that's an understatement." I racked my memory trying to think of some way to distract him, to cheer him up. Then it came to me. "I took your advice," I said. He glanced at me with mild curiosity. "You have no idea how right you were about the poetry thing." He raised his head, his eyes brightening. "You wrote some poetry?" "Yep, pretty much all day yesterday. If you want, you can come over tomorrow and I can show them to you. We can even have a Mario Kart tournament." "I'd like that a lot." A hint of a smile appeared on his lips, and butterflies fluttered in my chest as I remembered our kiss in the snow. I ducked my head, a blush creeping onto my cheeks. We sat watching the fireworks for a few more minutes, neither of us saying much, but something had changed within him. Then, his smile broadened, and he stood up, calling out to Michael, "Hey, do you guys still have some more that I can shoot off?" "Yeah, come here. We still have an entire pack of bottle rockets and about 3 of the Roman candles left." As he walked down the hill to join the others, a weight lifted from my shoulders. "How've you been, Destiny?" Dad asked the next morning as I stirred a gigantic bowl of pancake batter. "It's been pretty rough the past couple of months, but you know what? It's a new year, and I'm determined to make it a better one." I passed the bowl over to Dad, and he began pouring circles of batter onto the electric griddle. As Dad flipped the pancakes, one by one, he leaned casually against the countertop, asking me about my friends at church and what subjects I liked in school. After a few minutes, it became obvious that he was tiptoeing around the topic of Isaac. He still hadn't spoken to me about him since our breakup. Olivia walked into the kitchen and snatched a steaming pancake from the top of the growing stack. She tore off a piece and shoved it into her mouth. "What do you have planned for the rest of the day?" Dad asked. "Not too much. I know Preston's coming over a little bit later." "I heard about that," Dad said. "It sounds like he's been coming over more to see you than Michael here lately." I blushed. "You think?" "I think Preston has a thing for you," Olivia said. "Nah, we're just friends," I said, throwing a nervous glance in Dad's direction. "Isn't that what you said about Isaac?" Olivia pointed out. I winced, but for some reason, it didn't hurt quite as badly to hear him mentioned. The iceberg was still there, but it had shrunken considerably. "I would rather she stay my little girl forever," Dad said. "I don't like all this talk about you pairing off with boys." I glared at Olivia. I didn't appreciate her bringing up my boy drama. Ignoring my angry eyes, she said, "But Dad, if Destiny had to be paired up with someone, wouldn't Preston be a good choice?" "Olivia, why don't you set the table? We're about ready to eat," Dad said, indicating that the conversation was over. She didn't get the memo, apparently, because she went on to say, "We should have a surprise party for Michael's birthday. We can invite all his attractive friends." "Oh yeah. He's almost 18 now. With everything going on, I'd totally forgotten his birthday was coming up. You never know, you might end up with a bunch of dates out of the deal. Like something as simple as a birthday party would score me a load of dates. Probably not going to happen. I'm not so sure about the party idea. What was the point anyway? I'll probably be too busy with Les Mis rehearsals. Dad's face twisted as though the mere mention of Les Mis caused him pain. I think you should plan the party, he said. Les Mis rehearsals involved Isaac, and if I was passing up an opportunity to date Mormon boys because of an obsession with my Baptist ex-boyfriend, Dad didn't see that as healthy. Guilt seeped into me. I'd let Dad down enough. Okay, I said. I'll talk to Mom about it. Hey, Preston. I said a couple of hours later when I opened the door. Ready for some Mario Kart? Definitely, he said. It was amazing to see his smile back again. After we'd played several rounds, he flopped onto the couch and said, "You kicked my rear, woman." I wasn't very good at most video games, but I did have a knack for Mario Kart. This may sound funny, but I like this old-school version of Mario Kart the best, he said, motioning a hand toward the GameCube console. Remember when we used to play it at your house? That was forever ago. I think I was about 10. We found your family's stash of ice cream sandwiches and sundae cones and went through the entire 25-pack in one Saturday. I remember. It was the best day ever, he said. I could never eat that much now without getting sick. Wasn't that the same day I found the snake in the woods behind my house and hid it in my room? Oh yeah. How could I have forgotten? We were all so freaked out when you told us about it the next morning. I remember naming it Yoshi. You named it? That's so cute and gross all at the same time. I put it in my old, empty fish tank, and I tried convincing my mom to let me keep it. And as I remember, that didn't go over so well. Yeah. Not so much. He smiled lopsidedly. I looked up and met his eye, and as we basked in the funny memories, an unexpected electric current ran down my spine. What exactly was this between us? We'd shared a couple of knock-your-socks-off amazing kisses, but now it was like we were still just friends, pretending it had never happened. He tore his eyes away from mine, and an uncomfortable space grew between us. He cleared his throat. Do you want to show me your poetry now? Yeah, I said, recovering. I looked outside at the unseasonably warm day. It's nice out for once. Want to go hang out and read it by the creek? We took the same trail that led to the paintball field, but as we neared the bridge that led over the creek, we turned onto a small path into the woods. Pretty soon, the creek appeared, babbling with its freezing water. All around it, tulip poplars grew with gigantic exposed roots, big enough for me to wrap my arms around. The roots looped through the sides of the stream bank, like the scaly arms of a sea monster imprisoned by the dirt. My favorite tree was particularly strange, with several knots the size of pumpkins arranged in a triangular pattern like a face watching me. Beneath the face, two roots shot out from the tree like tentacles that formed a place to sit. I sat on the roots, dangling my feet down above the water. Preston sat on a boulder with his knees about 6 inches from my shoulder. I angled myself so my back was against the trunk of the tree, and I faced Preston. I flipped through the book and read my first poem to him. It was the one about the sacrifices mothers make. Although it was painful for him, Preston gave some surprising insights, leaving me with a lot to ponder and several ideas for future poems. You're good at this, I said. You should write some, too. Preston shifted on the rock, positioning himself into a sunbeam that peeked through the bare branches overhead. The light hit his hair, and it shone like gold. I have an entire notebook full. You should have brought it. I exclaimed. I bet your stuff is fantastic. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Was he blushing? Maybe I will one day, he said in a soft, hopeful voice. Something about the way he said it made him seem so vulnerable. It made me think of a day months ago when Hannah had found a journal on the shelf in his closet. Realization hit as I thought about the longing I'd heard in his words as he spoke of a girl. A blush crept onto my cheeks, and I found I could barely meet his gaze. "Is that it, or are there any more poems?" he asked. "There's one more." I flipped the page of the notebook and paused. The next page was all about Isaac. I stared at it without reading the words. I didn't need to. "Why the hesitation?" Preston asked softly. "I dunno," I stammered. "It's about Isaac. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about him." A faint smile played upon his lips. "Nah, let's hear it." I smoothed the page and read the first 3 lines before I faltered. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. I squeezed my eyes shut to ward off the tears. It wasn't working. "I just can't. It hurts too much." "It'll get better." "It's already better for you. Am I right?" I nodded. "I'm scared to see him again. I've gotten much stronger, but when I see him, I feel so weak." "I wish there was a way I could help you," he said. I smiled as I remembered the last time he'd helped me forget Isaac. It had definitely worked at the time, but after a while, the memories kept coming back. It was time to help myself. I ripped the sheet off, balled it up, and threw it into the creek. As I watched it bobbing in the water, traveling further away, my heart thawed even more. It was gone. "Feel better?" "I do," I said with a smile. "Well, that's all the poetry I have." "Does this mean you're going to let me read your poetry now?" "I don't know." I twisted to look at him. He was sitting so close his arm brushed mine. My breath quickened. He smelled woodsy and clean. "Is there some way I can convince you otherwise?" I asked. His eyes widened, and his breath caught. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. I was so afraid of getting hurt again. He wanted this with me, I could see it in his eyes, but something was holding him back. Maybe he wasn't ready to get into a relationship. Or maybe he felt vulnerable because of his mom. We were the same. 2 broken souls, floating along, searching for someone in which to cling. "What would I do without you?" I whispered. "I'll never forget how you were there for me that day in the treehouse. I've thought about it a lot since then." "Me, too," he said. "I want you to kiss me. I'm scared to hurt you. You've been through so much already. You would never hurt me. Are you sure this is what you want?" Behind the fear in his eyes lived a glimmering hope. "I'm sure." He leaned forward, and I clutched the edge of his leather jacket, pulling him closer to me. He brought his lips to mine, kissing me slowly and tenderly. Just as I was starting to really get into it, he pulled away. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "I'm not sure this is the right time." I studied his face and understood. "You're worried that I'm still not over him." "I think we're both too emotionally messed up to start a relationship right now." But what if starting a relationship was exactly what was best for us? We needed each other. But before I could say that, a voice rang out far above us in the treetops. "Bang, bang. Y'all are dead." I lifted my eyes to the high branches of a nearby sweet gum tree and spotted Elijah standing on a sturdy limb, his right arm clinging to the branch above him and his other hand outstretched, holding a gun-shaped stick. His dark, wavy locks were tousled, and he had a wicked grin on his face. I scrambled up and gathered armfuls of pine cones, fallen from a nearby loblolly pine. I chucked them in his direction, missing him by about 2 miles. "Ah!" Elijah screamed, as I continued pelting. I sharpened my aim and one hit the trunk a few feet from his mud boots. He chortled with delight. "You almost got me that time. You deserved it, you little spy." "Spy," he called down. "What were you and Preston doing down here all alone, anyway?" "We were waiting here, hoping you'd come attack us, of course," I said, trying to keep my voice sounding lighthearted. "Shouldn't you be getting back, Preston?" Elijah asked. I heard you promised your mom you'd still spend part of the day with her. I hadn't thought about it, but he had given up a large portion of what could quite possibly be the last New Year's he may ever have with his mom. Just to spend time with me. Preston tore his eyes from me and grunted in irritation as he pushed himself up from the oversized tree root. We swished through layers of sycamore and tulip poplar leaves as we made our way back to the main trail. I was talking to Olivia today, and she had this cool idea. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help out, I said. Probably. What did you have in mind? He said. I told him about the surprise party, and he agreed to come over early to help decorate and to invite people from church. I'll work on his school friends then. His face darkened for a moment, and I knew he was thinking about Isaac again. Don't worry. Isaac's one person who won't be on the list. Am I that easy to read? He asked. Only when Isaac's involved. Believe me, half the time I have no clue what you're really thinking. He chuckled softly. I had no idea you wanted to figure me out so badly. You're kind of a mysterious guy. Me? I've always thought of myself as pretty straightforward. You're honest, but that doesn't make you easy to read. There are still all these thoughts swarming through your head that I don't know about. He smiled, and his eyes grew distant for a moment. See? I said. What? He asked. Exactly. Preston smiled and stared at the driveway as we approached his truck. He looked over at me after he'd opened the driver's side door. Thanks for inviting me over today. He stared off into the tops of the trees. For a little while I was able to forget. I needed that. As he climbed into the truck, I realized I could say the same thing. Chapter 9, Isaac. The morning Christmas break was officially over. I gripped my coffee and headed into the building. Across the parking lot, Destiny climbed out of Michael's car. She'd used gel to enhance her natural curls, a hairstyle I'd never seen her wear before. It looked so different, leaving me wondering what it would be like to pull a curl down and watch it spring back up. Better yet, what would it be like to tangle my fingers in those curls? I'd never made out with a curly-haired girl before. But I'd lost that chance with Destiny. She didn't even glance in my direction as she walked into the building with Michael, talking and laughing easily with him. Even when I came up right behind them and said hi to Michael as they were opening the doors to the building, she didn't acknowledge me. Michael waved stiffly and turned away from me. Destiny. Hannah called to her in the hallway. Hey, she said. I heard about Megan and Preston's mom. How are they dealing with it? They're coping, I guess. Preston and I read poetry by the creek and she looked around nervously, but still didn't seem to notice me. The hallway was pretty crowded. Are you dating him now? I walked past. I really didn't want to hear the answer, but another part of me had to know. We're still trying to figure it out. I felt her eyes on me as I walked to the water fountain and stooped to take a drink. I twisted to see Hannah staring at me with raised eyebrows. I can see that. At lunch, I sat with Evelyn again. This time, she picked the table directly next to Destiny and Hannah's table, facing them. I cringed, but sat down anyway. Hannah was picking at her sub sandwich, eventually shoving it away with a groan of disgust. What? You don't like the delicious cafeteria food here? Hudson teased. I'm not feeling it today. Did y'all hear the news? Destiny asked. Michael's turning 18, and we're throwing him a surprise birthday party. Am I invited? Hannah asked. You're all invited, Destiny said. Epic party at Destiny's place? I'm in, Hudson said. I'll be there, Shanice said. I haven't even told y'all when it is, yet. As she filled them in on the details, her eyes fell on me and widened slightly as though she'd just noticed my presence. Her eyes slid over to Evelyn, and they narrowed. Somehow, I got the impression I wouldn't be invited. Chapter 10, Destiny. I shoved the last bite of my chocolate Pop-Tart into my mouth. Hannah was totally obsessed with them, and since I'd hung out with her so much last fall, it had rubbed off on me, too. It had taken a while, but I'd finally convinced Mom to start buying them for our after-school snack. I went back to my room, scooted my chair up to my desk, and flipped open my American history book to catch up on my reading assignment. We were studying the migration of the pioneers into the West, a subject that I was quite familiar with. As I scanned the reading material, my eyes snapped to the word Mormons. There was an entire box featuring the Mormons and their struggles to find a safe place to settle. They had sacrificed so much so they could live their religion in peace. My mind drifted to Preston, and I remembered several stories he had shared over the years about some of his pioneer ancestors. He came from some amazing, strong people. I collapsed into the desk next to Hannah the next day. Mr. Campbell was the coolest history teacher ever. He encouraged us to be open-minded and to study our findings from multiple angles to form our own opinions about what we were learning. Mr. Campbell captured my attention as he began explaining the migration of the early settlers into the American West. I'd felt so proud to read about the pioneers last night when I was alone in my room, but now apprehension fluttered in my chest. Mr. Campbell seemed like he might gloss over the Mormon section, but 5 minutes before class ended, he said, in 1830 the Mormon Church was founded by a man named Joseph Smith. He and his followers received harsh treatment by those around them. After the assassination of Joseph Smith in 1844, it became clear to the church that they could no longer stay in their home of Nauvoo, Illinois. In the year 1846, they were led by their new leader, Brigham Young, on a massive exodus to what is now the state of Utah. The entire time he spoke, I kept my eyes forward. I felt the eyes of some of my peers watching me, but I didn't meet their gaze. Just as he was finishing up, Mr. Campbell raised his eyes past me and called out, "Yes, Jesse? Don't Mormons believe that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young were actually prophets?" she asked. My face grew hot. Jesse knew very well that I believed in modern-day revelation and a living prophet. Back when we used to be best friends, we'd had plenty of discussions about my faith. She even knew that we had a church-wide conference twice a year to listen to our prophet and other church leaders give messages to the world. The only reason she would have to bring it up now would be to make me feel like even more of a freak and an outcast than I already did. Mr. Campbell nodded. That's right. Do you think it's possible that there might still be prophets out there today? Absolutely not, Mr. Campbell said. Why couldn't the ground open up and swallow me whole? I stared at my backpack near my feet. I could understand Jessie bringing this up in Bible class, but did she have to start up a religious discussion in history, too? History and all my other secular classes were supposed to be a break from all the religion being crammed down my throat. But no. Every class was about religion at Bethel. They all started with a prayer, and Mrs. Smith even read from a devotional book at the start of every geometry class. It wasn't like I had a problem with religion, I loved the gospel, but when it was someone else's spin on the Bible, and it was inserted into almost every discussion in almost every class, it tended to get a little exhausting. The Bible explains that clearly. God gives a very serious warning to anyone who tries to add or take away from the Bible. You can find many examples with supporting evidence in both the Old and the New Testament. He expounded on the subject, but I tuned him out. I expected more from Mr. Campbell. He'd always seemed so open-minded, but everything he was saying was the same stuff the other teachers had pounded into my head a million times before. I couldn't be sure, since I was so young when we joined the church, but Michael seemed to think that since we'd converted, Bethel had gone on a special campaign to disprove every doctrine my family believed. They must have tried so hard to convert us back, but it never worked. Every time they tore down my religion or preached doctrines we disagreed with, we clung to our faith even tighter. That had to be why Dr. Robinson was so determined to get rid of us. When the bell rang, Mr. Campbell called out, "Don't forget to get together with your partner and pick a topic for the presentation due next week." Hannah looked over at me. "Want to get together after school to knock this out?" Okay, I said tightly. Want to come to my place? Or will your parents get mad? She cocked her head to the side and asked, Are you okay? You seem a little tense. I stood and scooped up my books. I don't know. I felt like everyone was staring at me during the section on Mormons. Jessie's such a brat. I know she did that on purpose. There's no doubt about that. Don't worry about her. She's just still bitter you got to date Isaac and she didn't. She cringed at the sharp look I gave her. Sorry, I shouldn't have brought that up. Anything good happen with Preston this morning in seminary? Other than him looking super attractive and answering all the tough questions? Not that it was anything out of the ordinary for him. If she was trying to calm me down by changing the subject, then she was on the right track. Thinking about him melted the hurt away. You mean Mr. Mormon Pioneer stock? I said. Huh? Preston descended from the pioneers we were talking about today. It just made me think of him, that's all. I could definitely see in him the values of hard work and honesty that had been passed down through the generations in his family. I felt an immense respect for him because of it. You sound like you really like him. I grinned. What makes you say that? You got all starry-eyed when you talked about him. I blushed furiously. I did? It would be so simple to be with him. He can date me with my parents' permission. There would be no need for lying or sneaking around. Yeah, but that's half the fun, Hannah said with a naughty smile. She was right. Sneaking around with Isaac really had been fun, but I wasn't going to admit it to her. We turned the corner, and I almost slammed into Isaac. His eyes widened in surprise but changed quickly to a mask that reminded me of his dad. Watch where you're going, Isaac, Hannah teased good-naturedly. My heart slammed against my chest. Bam, bam, bam. He flashed her a smile but stepped around me like I was a tree trunk in his way, not even bothering to look in my direction again. Why should I care? He was the one who'd tried to hurt my family. Hurting me was one thing, but go after my family? Better watch out. I was still riled up from that history lesson. At lunch, Hannah and Evan were bickering worse than Elijah and Brianna. I wasn't even sure what they were mad about, but Hannah was fuming. Finally, Evan got up, threw his trash away, and walked out the double doors. He makes me crazy, she said. He's been disagreeing with everything I've said this week. Maybe it's time to find a new guy, I suggested. After school, Hannah came over in her new red Toyota Corolla. She'd turned 16 right before Christmas, and for her birthday she got a car straight from the factory. I didn't know whether or not her parents knew or cared that she was coming to the Mormon's house. She didn't say, and I wasn't going to ask. We kicked Olivia out of the room and settled onto the plush white carpet next to my bed. I was thinking we could do our project on the pioneers crossing the plains. I scooted a stack of books I'd borrowed from Preston earlier that day. His dad was a huge family history buff and collected books on his ancestors' trials as pioneers. Hannah made a face. Oh really? She challenged. I had my heart set on doing it on the history of plantation houses in Tennessee. I've always been fascinated by them. I practically worshipped Scarlett O'Hara since I was 5. Oh, I said. But I've spent half the afternoon studying all these books. I pulled out 3 pages of notes I'd painstakingly written out. Why'd you even want me to be your partner if you were planning on taking over the entire project before I even showed up? She snapped. I sat back, blinking. I didn't think you'd care. I'd never seen Hannah so angry before. It was like she'd switched bodies with Jesse Larson. My brow furrowed in irritation, but then I took a deep breath. She'd been fighting with Evan. Maybe he'd been really hard on her. Okay, I said. I pushed the books to the side. What ideas do you have so far? She stared at me blankly. Well, I haven't actually given it too much thought, yet. I wasn't sure I could take any more of her crazy mood swings. My Les Mis rehearsal was looming ahead of me, and I felt completely unprepared. I could have been practicing my solo instead of doing all that pioneer research. It seemed like such a waste, and it was all because Hannah was being moody. I didn't have the time, energy, or patience for it. Hannah pulled out her laptop and began typing. I eyed it enviously. My connection to the outside world consisted of a cell phone that didn't connect to the internet and one desktop computer at the other end of the house, closely monitored by my mom, who sent me to do chores whenever she noticed me online. She considered it a big waste of time. She didn't understand that half of the average teenage kid's life was online now. Hannah pulled up several articles from historical blogs and put together a PowerPoint presentation on the decline of plantations in Tennessee after the Civil War. It was fascinating stuff, but since I was still irritated that she'd completely disregarded my research, I sat back and let her do most of the work. Enough of this. I'm dying for some Taco Bell. You want to come with? Girls' night with Hannah in her new car? Yes, please. Even if she was in a bad mood. I could use some Taco Bell right about now. Hannah packed her laptop, and as we were heading out the front door, Mom called to me, "Where are you going?" Whoops, I'd forgotten to ask permission to leave the house. Oh, is it okay if Hannah and I make a quick Taco Bell run? I suppose so. Just don't stay out too late. It's a school night, and you have seminary in the morning. You know I like you to be in bed by 9:30. Don't worry, Mrs. Clark. I'll have her home safe and sound by 9, Hannah said in a deep voice, like she was pretending to be my date. Cut it out, you dork. We considered going through the drive-thru, but decided to eat inside. You know, they add all this fancy stuff to the menu, but when it comes right down to it, I always get the same old bean burritos. And then I'm never disappointed. You're making me want one, too. She giggled. We took our orders of bean burritos and grabbed a table. I crinkled the paper away from the burrito and sunk my teeth into the warm beans and gooey cheese. Hannah peeled back the wrapper on hers and took a bite as well. When I was 12, I saw Gone with the Wind. I loved it so much that I got the book and read the entire thing. You read Gone with the Wind when you were only 12? Isn't that book like 1,000 pages long? 960. She said it automatically, like she'd bragged about it many times before. I'd seen Mom's copy, and it was thicker than a brick. Did you know that before the war, the O'Hara's plantation was successful because Scarlett's mother was so involved with the management of it? I mean, talk about a successful businesswoman back in the day. I'd eaten through my entire burrito, and Hannah had yet to take a second bite. She bit into the burrito again, and her face turned slightly green. She put the burrito down. Ugh. This doesn't taste good. She stared at it for a minute and then screwed up her face. I'm going to be sick. She leapt from the booth and darted into the restroom. Should I go in after her? No. She probably wanted privacy. 5 minutes later, the door squeaked and Hannah came out. She slid into the booth across from me, her face pale, but there was something else there as well. Worry? Fear? Suspicion? Are you okay? I asked. She shook her head half a shake. I think. She looked around and leaned forward. Before I tell you this, you have to swear you won't tell anyone. What? Promise, she hissed fervently. Okay, I promise. I'm late. What are you talking about? I mean, I'm late. You know? Aunt Flo? She hasn't come to visit this month. EW. Why are you telling me this in the middle of Taco Bell? Because I'm freaking out here. Can't you tell? Hannah, it's normal to be irregular sometimes. It happens. Maybe that was why she'd been so moody lately. Her hormones were probably all messed up from being irregular. She let out the puff of air she'd been holding. I hope you're right. I know some girls just get on birth control, and it helps them get things straightened out. I've never been late before though. The haunted look crept back onto her face. And I'm sick. I felt like taking a nap all day. Bean burritos taste disgusting when normally they're my favorite. Something is wrong with me. It sounds like you have a stomach virus. Hannah shook her head. I'd like to believe you, but I'm getting this feeling that you're wrong. I cocked an eyebrow at her. What are you trying to say? Quit beating around the bush. Her eyes were wild with fright. I think I'm pregnant. You're what? Shoo. I'm serious. How could that even be a possibility? She looked at me pointedly. What the heck, Hannah? I stood up from the booth, trashed my wrapper, and bolted toward the parking lot with Hannah following closely. We settled into her Corolla and an awkward silence grew between us. Finally, I said, so you and Evan. Hannah rolled her eyes. Obviously. You know there are ways to prevent pregnancy, right? We weren't planning to take it that far, Hannah insisted. At least, I wasn't. She stared at the steering wheel. I don't know what to do. She sounded like a lost little girl. Tell me what to do. Go take a test. She nodded. Okay, but you can't tell anyone. I won't. I already promised. They sell those at Walmart, right? She reversed out of her parking spot. Yeah, my mom picked one up a couple of years ago when she had a false alarm. Maybe that's all this is. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself, but it wasn't working very well. I'd never seen her so scared. She drove to the store, her shoulders hunched as though sitting in that position would somehow lessen the blow of her situation. She pulled into a parking spot and said, I can't be pregnant. I'm only a sophomore. I still have to finish high school. What am I going to do with a baby? I don't babysit. I don't even know how to change a diaper. If my parents find out, they're going to freak. How am I going to hide this? Calm down. You might be upset over nothing. I can't. I can't. She held her arms around herself and rocked back and forth. I can't go in there. I don't want to know. Hannah. Just go pee on the stick and get it over with. Don't think about what you're doing. I can't do it. She reached into the back seat and brought out a Coach purse. She unzipped it and pulled out a 20. What are you doing? She shoved the money into my hands. Can you buy it for me? Seriously? Buying a pregnancy test in public would be horrifying. But her hands were trembling. Whatever embarrassment I might feel buying this test for her would be a zillion times worse if she did it herself, because for Hannah, the humiliation was real. I creased the bill in half and pocketed it. All right, I'll do it. I opened the door and crossed the darkened parking lot. I walked inside the sliding glass doors and past the shopping carts, not bothering to grab one. On my way to the pharmacy, I passed a young mother with a cartload of tiny kids. Two of the kids were having a poking match. One of the toddlers jabbed his sister in the eye, and she let loose an ear-piercing scream. It was a good thing Hannah hadn't come with me. The last thing she needed was to hear some kid crying. I checked 2 or 3 aisles, finding only shampoo and hairbrushes. Then, finally, I located the pregnancy tests next to an array of other items I didn't want to think about. If Hannah hadn't been so supportive about my heartbreak over Isaac, I'd say she seriously owed me. I stood in front of the tests, trying to figure which one to buy. I eventually settled on the generic brand. I reached for it apprehensively like it was covered in prickly thorns. A woman with gray, curly hair turned around, saw me holding the test, and shook her head disapprovingly. What is the world coming to? These trashy girls just keep getting younger and younger. I bit back the snippy reply sitting on the tip of my tongue. Conjuring an extreme amount of self-control, I turned and walked toward the registers. The lines were always bad at this particular Walmart, but they seemed especially bad at the moment. I got into line behind the young mother I'd seen previously and picked up a copy of In Style to distract myself from the task at hand. Destiny? I didn't need to turn to see who was addressing me. I knew his voice anywhere. Chapter 11, Isaac. I don't know why you're bothering to hide that, since I saw it from like 20 feet away, I said bitterly. Destiny stared back at me with wide eyes. Who did this to you? This has nothing to do with you, Isaac. Seeing her beautiful eyes flash at me, hearing her say my name like it was a curse, it was ripping my heart to shreds. Well, that's one thing I'm definitely sure of. Shock registered in her eyes as she caught my meaning, and she flicked her eyes away from me, blushing deeply. We stayed like that for a moment. She stared at her feet morosely, and I stood like an idiot in the middle of the store, gaping at her. I'm starting to wonder if I had something to do with this indirectly, that I drove you to this. Don't flatter yourself. She rolled her eyes bitterly. Who did this to you? Preston? Had she thrown herself at him? Slept with him so she could forget me? What? No. She blushed furiously and glanced at the lady in front of her. She looked so furious, I half expected her to throw the pregnancy test across the store. Maybe she really was pregnant. She certainly had been acting a bit hormonal. Who was it then? Did she get raped? Maybe she had an entirely new guy from church. I know I've hurt you. I can't tell you how sorry I am for that, but if you're in trouble, you shouldn't have to go through this alone. Well, you'll be glad to know you don't have to bother yourself over me. It's not mine. I'm here for a friend. So, you're not pregnant? No, I'm not. My defensive mood evaporated immediately, replaced by relief that flooded me to the core. Then who was? I narrowed my eyes as I studied her, and suddenly, it dawned on me. I knew what this was all about. Hannah had been acting even crazier than Destiny lately. Is it Hannah's? She tore her eyes away from my scrutiny. You don't know this person. She was obviously lying. Oh, man, I spoke softly with an undercurrent of knife twisting. It really was Hannah's. You're lying, aren't you? You're a terrible liar. She stared at the box in her hand silently. It was all the confirmation I needed. What had Hannah gotten herself into this time? The lady in front of Destiny took her receipt and pushed away her cart. Destiny placed the box on the conveyor belt and kept her eyes away from me. I wish you would just go away. Who, me? The large African-American cashier asked in an insulted voice. No, him. Is he the one who did this to you? She swiped the box over her barcode scanner. I laughed easily. Destiny gave me a weird look. Oh yes, I said. We just got married, and we're expecting our first already. I put my arm around her. Destiny's jaw dropped. The cashier eyed me suspiciously. You look awfully young to be married. I shrugged and bit back a laugh. I couldn't stay away from her. Destiny turned bright red and hid her face in her hands. That'll be 1068. She stepped away from my arm and pulled out a 20. I put my hand over hers. No, sweetheart, I'll pay for it. You save that money to get something pretty for the nursery. She lowered her hand and looked at me like I'd lost it. Then her face softened, and I got the impression she'd finally understood what I was trying to do. I had no idea what Hannah's future held. What if she decided to keep the baby? Would her parents throw her out? I could picture Dad doing something like that. Was Aunt Bethany much better? I hoped so. I pictured her and Evan living together in some dump trying to raise a screaming baby, and I shuddered. I yanked my wallet from the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out my credit card. I slid it through the slot in the electronic keypad and signed the screen. Have a nice day. Y'all take care, the cashier called out cheerfully. Destiny grabbed the plastic bag, and I fell into step with her as she headed to the front door. What were you doing back there? She snapped. Protecting your honor. She clenched her jaw like she was trying to keep it from dropping again. Why are you being so nice? I stood still. I never stopped being nice. That was all you. When she didn't reply, I continued. I've tried to apologize many times. This isn't a good time for this conversation. I have someone waiting for me, she said. My brow creased with worry. I'd almost forgotten about Hannah. You're right. I'm sorry. For some reason, my apology seemed to exasperate and annoy her even more. When we reached the doors, she said, "You can't follow me out here." I continued walking as though I hadn't heard her. She grabbed my arm from behind as I stepped through the automatic doors. She let go just as suddenly as she'd grabbed it, like my arm had burned her hand. I spun to face her. Her blue eyes smoldered. Was she looking at me like that because she was worried about Hannah, or was it because she'd touched me? She's my cousin. She needs help. I strode forward with purpose in my step. I swore to keep her secret, she called out to me. She's freaking out enough as it is. That's all the more reason to comfort her. I stood on my tiptoes and scanned the parking lot for Hannah's car. Come on. She's this way, she said in a deflated voice. We walked in silence to Hannah's car, and when we arrived, Destiny knocked on the driver's side window. The engine was running, and Les Miserables blasted through her speakers. My mouth twisted into a sardonic grin when I recognized the strains of I Dreamed a Dream. It was about a woman who'd had her life ruined by an unplanned pregnancy. Hannah looked up at Destiny and wiped her eyes with a napkin from a fast food place. She rolled down her window, and her eyes widened with fear when she saw me standing with Destiny. What's he doing here? It's nice to see you, too, Hannah, I joked. She didn't smile. Interesting choice of music, I said dryly. You told him? The glare she gave Destiny was lethal. Great. Now, I'd gotten Destiny in trouble. Destiny was mad enough at me as it was. She didn't tell me anything, I assured her. I ran into her at the store and figured it out. When she opened her mouth to protest, I said, I won't tell anyone. You have my word. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. She might not need any help. She has to take the test first, Destiny pointed out. Come out of the car, take it in the bathrooms here, I said. I can't. Why not? I asked. I just can't. I'm just so scared to know. Evan Bellingham was going to pay. Hannah was such a vibrant part of my life, and seeing her debilitated terrified me. Sitting in here, listening to that depressing song, isn't going to help you. When Hannah didn't move, I reached inside her open window and popped open the lock on her car door. Come on. You don't have to do this alone. He's right. I'll go in there with you if you want, Destiny offered. She reached down and tugged on Hannah's hand. Hannah turned off the motor, gathered her purse, and climbed out of the car. Together, the three of us crossed the busy parking lot back into the store. We walked through the automatic doors and past the shopping carts. Hannah's teeth chattered next to me. Why are your teeth chattering? Destiny asked. I'm just really freaked out right now. Sometimes they do that, okay, she barked. I threw Destiny a cautioning glance, and she smiled back tightly. She was actually going to smile at me now? Well, that was something, at least. Chapter 12, Destiny. Isaac waited on a bench outside the restroom. Once we were inside the ladies' room, I breathed a little easier. If I had to hang around him 1 second longer. I handed Hannah the Walmart bag with the test inside, and she motioned me to come inside the handicapped stall with her. I have no idea how to even use this thing, she said. Here, let me read the instructions. I unfolded the inserted paper and scanned the illustrations. It says you're supposed to take it first thing in the morning, but I think it will still work now. I explained the basics of peeing on the stick, capping it, and laying it flat while the test developed. All right, you ready? I handed her the uncapped stick with the absorbent strip exposed. She gave me a queasy look but took it from me. Do you want me to leave? No. Just turn around. Okay. I turned toward the corner and stared at the dirty grout of the bathroom floor. In an attempt to lighten the situation, I said, I think this was the strangest trip to Walmart I've ever taken. I relayed my experience with the old lady and then my exchange with Isaac. It must have helped, because by the time I told her about the cashier's reaction, Hannah was giggling. That's awesome. I heard her snap the cap onto the test and the toilet flush. I told you Isaac still has it bad for you. I turned around and looked at her, drawing brows together. You think he really does? A small flame of hope flickered in my heart, and the ice started melting again. She pursed her lips like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. What? He doesn't feel that way about Mormons anymore. The cold blew into my heart like a blizzard, swift and furious, and extinguished the flame. How do you know? He could just be saying that to placate you. The bottom line is, I can't trust anything he says. The numbing cold spread in my chest again. What about the time he'd taken me to his land and told me he believed I was a Christian? Was it all an act? How many of his kisses were even real? I recalled the way his lips had moved over mine and shuddered. There was no doubt about it. Those kisses were real. That would mean that he was attracted to me but kept his ulterior motives in the back of his mind the entire time. That explanation made sense. So, he just wanted me for my body? Lovely. Anger burned inside me again. Hannah choked back a sob. The line. It's there. I snapped my head up, jerking myself out of my pity party and back to Hannah's desperate situation. Both lines? There have to be 2 lines to get a positive. Yes, she cried. I stepped over to where the test was resting on the toilet paper dispenser and glimpsed the solid double lines. I held back a gasp. So, it was true. Hannah looked at me in fright. This can't be real. The test has to be wrong. I read on the paper that false positives are extremely rare. Even if there's a faint or broken line, it still counts as positive. What am I going to do? She wailed. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this is a sick, twisted dream. I'm so sorry. I hate Evan. I hate him and his stupid pressuring. What do you mean? He'd been pushing me to take our relationship to the next level for months, but I didn't want that. Do you think he did this on purpose? Not exactly. I think he wanted it so badly he couldn't think straight. How did y'all even have the opportunity? Whenever his parents weren't home, he'd text me, and I'd sneak out the back door to go see him. My mom always thought I was watching TV in my room. I'd sneak up to his room, and we'd cuddle up and watch movies, eat, and usually end up making out. Some days we'd just jump right to the kissing. It was like he couldn't think about anything else. How did your mom never find out? She was swamped with work. Then it was Christmas time and she was out doing last-minute shopping. You know how it can be. We heard several pairs of feet shuffling as a young mother with a toddler came into the bathroom. The little girl was cranky and the mom was trying to soothe her, but it was late and obviously past the kid's bedtime. Hannah wrapped the test in layers of toilet paper, shoved it into her purse, crammed the empty box into the tampon disposal, and unbolted the bathroom stall. She washed her hands methodically, and we listened as the mom talked sweetly to her little girl, despite the child's nonstop whining. Hannah looked at me with panicked eyes that said, "I'm not ready for this." When we walked out, Isaac stood, his eyes so full of concern, one might think he was the father instead of Hannah's cousin. The tenderness displayed so openly on his face tugged at my heart, and I had to look away. So, he asked finally. Positive. Hannah said the dreaded word softly. This is happening, isn't it? I nodded, my heart heavy. We stood silently as people crisscrossed past us through the store. Isaac cleared his throat and indicated that we head back to the car. What does Evan know about this? He knows it's a possibility, but I don't think he wants to admit how real it might be, Hannah said. Did he force you into this? Isaac asked like he'd been holding the question inside himself for a long time and had finally decided to let it loose. Hannah glanced away from him uncomfortably. I got the impression she didn't want to have this conversation with Isaac. He didn't force me, but he was very persistent. I'm so mad at him right now I could. He glanced in my direction. Well, never mind. You make it sound like you're contemplating taking away his manhood, I joked. Something like that, he muttered. I don't know what to do, Hannah whispered. She sounded like a song stuck on repeat. Why don't you go home and get some rest, Isaac suggested. You don't need to make any decisions, yet. I have to drop Destiny off first. I don't mind taking her. Yeah, that's not happening, I said. There were way too many painful memories associated with his truck, and if I went in there, I'd have an emotional breakdown. I didn't miss the pain in his eyes at my rejection. Just because we'd touched and had a few conversations didn't mean I was going to rush back into his arms. I had something good going with Preston, and I didn't want to mess it up. There was another reason anyway. My parents are just starting to trust me again. If I show up with you, everything I've done to build that trust will be thrown away. If Michael or Preston saw me. Did I really cause that much trouble for you? He asked softly. Was he that clueless? Why are we talking about this? I snapped. Hannah, can you please take me home now? Sure. She looked over her shoulder at Isaac. And, to answer your question. Are you stupid? You freaking ruined her life. It was sweet of her to say it, considering her situation. She had way more cause to be angry at Evan than I had to be at Isaac. Isaac had only broken my heart. My heart was mending, and I would be whole again one day. Hannah? She would be stuck with a kid for the rest of her life. She would have a much longer, more painful road to travel before she found peace. Her youth was snatched away from her, and she would never get it back. Chapter 13, Isaac. I stood in the middle of the Walmart parking lot and stared after Hannah and Destiny as they climbed into the car and drove off. I couldn't get Hannah's words out of my head. Had I really ruined Destiny's life? It was so hard to know if she still had feelings for me. She always kept her emotions so guarded when I was around. The following evening, I was working in Aunt Bethany's office when Hannah came in the front door. Aunt Bethany was in another part of the house doing laundry. Hey, Isaac. She came and sat down in her mom's swivel chair. Where've you been? Over at Evan's. Again? Hadn't she learned her lesson about that guy? Have you told him, yet? Her face paled. No. When are you going to? I have no idea. I need some time to figure stuff out, you know? I guess that makes sense. I leaned back in my chair. I was so scared when I saw Destiny standing in line with that test. You really do owe her for that. I know. She's been super supportive. I was afraid to tell her, because I thought she would get all judgy on me, but she didn't. She leaned forward with an earnest question on her face. Something's been bugging me, and Destiny wouldn't talk about it on the drive home. What? I asked. How'd you figure out Destiny was buying the test for me? Well, at first, I thought it was hers. Seriously? Come on, Isaac. The girl doesn't even wear sleeveless stuff, for Pete's sake. She's the last person out of everyone I know who'd get herself knocked up. She doesn't wear sleeveless stuff? How had I never realized that? How much else was there about her that I didn't know? No. Where have you been? You were her boyfriend. Maybe you should have asked her a few more questions about what she believed. Oh wait. I forgot. You did. That's what you were trying to do all along. Hannah, you have no idea how much I wish I could erase some of that stuff from my past. Her face softened. I'm sorry. That was uncalled for. I've just been so snippy lately. I understand. You have a long road ahead of you. I'm trying not to think too much about it. Mormons don't wear sleeveless stuff? I asked. That's what Destiny said. Huh, I said. So, when you saw Destiny and jumped to conclusions, whose baby did you think it was? Well, since she's dating Preston, my voice trailed off. Okay, first of all, she's not with him. Second of all, Preston's an even bigger goody two-shoes than she is. I wouldn't be surprised if he's never kissed a girl. You don't think they've kissed? Last time I checked, they've never kissed. Unless she's been keeping things from me. Come to think of it, she has been starry-eyed lately. We're going to have a little talk about that sometime soon. Why was she rubbing it in my face? It must be a hormonal thing. Hannah cocked her head and narrowed her eyes. Wait a second. What makes you think she's been dating Preston? I clenched my jaw and looked away, fighting the blush that wanted to creep across my face. I might have heard you guys talking about it in the hall the other day. Oh, you mean you were eavesdropping on a private conversation? I threw up my hands in my defense. It couldn't have been that private if you were having it in the middle of the hallway at school. I guess you couldn't resist when you heard Destiny had another guy. It's not fake this time, is it? Hannah shook her head and looked at me with sad eyes. No. It's not fake. She studied me for a moment. You still really want her, don't you? I couldn't meet her gaze anymore. I studied the wood grain on the desk instead. Hannah had no idea how much my heart ached for Destiny. Her voice was gentle when she spoke again. I'm going to take that as a yes. My throat thickened and I couldn't speak. When you've struggled so much with something and then a friend acknowledges your pain with empathy, it brings everything to the surface at once. I fought back the overwhelming urge to allow tears to spill down my cheeks and rested my chin on my fist as I fought to control my emotions. If she was with Preston, it really was over for us, wasn't it? I'd made a huge mess of things. Maybe it was time to accept the fact that she'd decided to move on with her life. But how would I ever be able to move on with mine? Chapter 14, Destiny. The Wednesday before the birthday party was the day Isaac and I were supposed to rehearse a little Fall of Rain. I'd been dreading it for weeks. Whenever we'd rehearsed it before, we'd been next to a piano, but this time we were going to have to appear on stage to act out the hands-on version. Some of the choir members were hanging out in the pews of the choir loft, goofing around. I was on the stage, leaning against the choir loft and tapping my fingers on the ledge apprehensively as I waited for Mr. Bird to arrive. Evan bounded up the maroon-carpeted steps and greeted Isaac, who was standing about 15 feet away from me on stage. I watched as Evan slid into the pew beside Hannah and held his face close to hers as he murmured to her. I fidgeted with the buttons on my navy cardigan and pulled a long, curly, brown hair from the sleeve of my sweater. I decided to allow the natural curl in my hair to take over today since it was cold and rainy, fitting weather for the song we'd be singing today. Mr. Bird walked down the aisle of the chapel, and a hush came over the room. Isaac glanced at me and smiled lightly, but I looked away, pretending I hadn't seen it. After a quick prayer, Mr. Bird said, "Okay, let's dive in with a little Fall of Rain. Marius, Eponine, thanks for being in place and ready." I glanced in Isaac's direction. I was nowhere near ready. The music started, and we stepped toward the center of the stage, carefully keeping a safe distance from each other. We hadn't practiced our song in months, and we'd gotten a little rusty. Especially me. I was holding back so much that it sounded a bit dull, even to my ears. When he reached the last note, Isaac sang it with aching tenderness. Mr. Bird pressed his lips together and studied his stack of papers pensively. Finally, he looked up and spoke slowly, like he was choosing each word carefully. "I'm sure you know this is meant to be a very intense scene. I need to see more action." He paused thoughtfully. "Let me go into a little bit more of the background of the story to emphasize what I'm trying to say here. Eponine is shot during the battle at the barricade and spends her last moments in Marius's arms. Destiny, let's have you enter from the right side of the stage, he said, indicating the spot. Once we're in costume, you'll be disguised as a boy, he explained. When the intro begins, you'll rush past Isaac at the center of the stage. Isaac, you'll recognize her, grab her arm in surprise as she passes, and berate her for putting herself in harm's way. Then you'll ask her whether or not she's made contact with Cosette. Destiny, as you're explaining things to him, you collapse from the pain. Isaac, that's when you'll catch her and lower her to a sitting position on the ground, Mr. Bird said, gesturing to show what he meant. My face reddened at his mention of Isaac's arms around me, and I took a deep breath to calm my racing heart. It didn't work. I was starting to have second thoughts about doing this. That's when Marius discovers the blood she's been hiding on the inside of her coat. At this point, things rapidly become tender between them. Eponine was his friend, and she was the person who brought him to his precious Cosette, so he's very upset about her impending death. Eponine, on the other hand, is savoring her last moments with the man of her dreams. This is the moment she's been waiting for. This is her one and only chance to have any kind of intimacy with Marius. It's the only chance she ever gets. Destiny, you need to show that here. I swallowed and nodded bravely. I'd told him there wouldn't be a problem with me playing Eponine, and I intended to stand by that. I couldn't let him know how hard this was for me, or he'd be sure to pull me from the musical. Mr. Bird waved his hand, indicating that he wanted us to move into our places. I walked to the side of the stage, hands trembling. When the pianist played the first notes, I walked toward Isaac hesitantly and, as planned, collapsed into his arms. I looked up into his brown eyes. I couldn't be this close to him. Real pain exploded in my chest. I wanted to pull away, but his strong hand wrapped around my head, his fingers entangled into my curly locks. The melody came to an awkward stop, and Isaac cleared his throat. His face was only 2 inches from mine. His face was an emotionless mask, and I wondered if this was as hard for him as it was for me. He pressed his lips together before a hint of amusement touched his face, almost like he didn't want to allow a pleasant emotion to surface when I was this close to him. You're supposed to be singing right now, he whispered. Hello? Eponine? You haven't died, yet, Sydney said from the soprano section. Pull yourself together, girl, snickered someone I couldn't see. All right, that's enough, Mr. Bird scolded the girls giggling in the choir loft. Let's take it from measure 22. Isaac repeated his last few lines, and this time, my brain decided to function properly, enabling me to sing my next few lines without forgetting anything. He shifted my back against his chest. As his face pressed against mine, the slight stubble on his chin brushed my forehead. I repressed a shudder. While he sang, I could feel the vibrations his chest made against my back, and I impulsively wrapped my hands around his muscled arm. Heat came to my face as I realized how it must look to the other students. I sat up quickly to put a few inches of distance between us, but he pulled me back close to him so that I was cradled in his arms with my face only inches from his. Suddenly, it was like we'd never been apart. There were no lies, no difference of religion. It was just Isaac and me, and for that precious, intense moment, that was all that mattered. I stared at his lips as he sang and craved to feel them on mine once again. I ceased to even hear what he was singing about anymore. I lay there, savoring the feeling, not wanting it to ever end. As I sang my last notes, I began feeling lightheaded, whether from being so close to Isaac, or from breathing his expelled air, I wasn't sure. I turned my face away and inhaled deeply to clear my head. Right on cue, Isaac repeated my last dying words, and I collapsed back into his arms, pretending to be dead. After a pause, he finished the song with a single, melancholy note. He then crushed me to his chest, rocking me as he cried out, Eponine, in a tortured voice. In that moment, reality crashed upon me, slamming my vulnerable heart. This wasn't about Isaac and me. He was only playing his role as Marius. He was such a good actor that I actually believed he'd fallen for me. The choir behind us burst into applause. "Well done! Well done!" Mr. Bird said emphatically. He stood, looking very impressed. "As far as initial run-throughs go, your performance today was the most realistic rendition I've ever seen of that number." I wasn't sure whether to be embarrassed or proud. "That was beyond words," I heard Hannah from behind me. "Was she crying?" "I thought they broke up," someone hissed from the choir loft. "Take a break, get a drink, and in 2 minutes we'll move on to the next scene," Mr. Bird announced. Isaac pulled his hands from my hair, his class ring catching on a snarl. "Oh, sorry, did I hurt you?" I looked at him sharply for a moment as though there might be a double meaning in his words. "Did I hurt you?" What kind of question was that? Isaac stood, reaching down to offer me his hand. I took it, and it was warm and strong. My heart pounded wildly, but immediately my wall of protection went up. As I walked to the hall outside the chapel, Michael studied me with concern. "I can tell, this is hard on you. You know, if you don't want to be Eponine, you don't have to do it. I'm sure there are plenty of other girls who would love to take over." I considered his words. "No, I want to be Eponine," I insisted. "I'm fine, really. Please don't worry about me." "Okay, but if Isaac ever hurts you again, let me know, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen another time." I arched an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? "I'd try not to do anything violent, but I can't make any promises," Michael said firmly as he stepped through the doors and into the parking lot. Chapter 15, Isaac. Why had I let my guard drop with her? I'd been determined to keep my distance from Destiny after my last talk with Hannah, but how could I help it when we had rehearsals and Mr. Bird wanted my hands all over Destiny? I gathered my music folder and left the chapel to grab a drink before the break ended. I couldn't help but overhear Michael talking to Destiny about me hurting her. He really did hate me, didn't he? When my ring had caught in her hair, I had only meant physically, but the look in her eyes made me think she'd wondered if I meant more. I didn't know what to think at this point. Did she still have feelings for me? After that performance, it was hard to think that she didn't. I fed $1 into the drink machine and hit the button to release a Coke. After this day, I could really use a dose of caffeine. Was it just me, or did Destiny and you have some massive chemistry on stage just now? My drink fell to the bottom of the machine, and I turned to see Hannah standing behind me with her hands on her hips. I grabbed my drink and sighed. Just because we have chemistry doesn't mean everything's going to magically work out. Nope. You're right. You're going to have to actually do something to work everything out. Hannah stared at me like I was supposed to know what in the world she was talking about. And how am I supposed to do that? Go after her. She still wants you. That was clear as day just now. It doesn't matter what she may or may not have going on with Preston. That girl is madly in love with you. Period. I fiddled with the bottle in my hands. I don't know, Hannah. You're a wimp. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to be a wimp. It means you don't have to get your heart smashed. Who are you, and what have you done with my cousin? The Isaac I know would go for what he wants and wouldn't let some guy like Preston stand in the way. Maybe I'm not the same guy anymore. I'd been through so much. I was sick of getting my heart trampled. First Aspen and now Destiny. Protecting my heart was starting to sound more appealing every day. I'd done the whole vulnerable, honest thing, and where had it gotten me? Shouldn't Hannah be able to see that? Relationships were bad news. Look where it had gotten her. You can still get that guy back. I hate seeing you miserable. Remember how happy you were with Destiny? You guys are meant to be together. I can just feel it. Can't you? I did feel it. It was why my heart hurt so much. Being without her was like living in darkness. If I couldn't be with her, I didn't want to be with anyone. Do you think she'd actually give me a chance? A tiny flame of hope lit in my chest, and I was terrified to let it stay. You just need to get her attention. I've been trying to get her attention. She wants nothing to do with me. You're a resourceful guy. I have a feeling if you think of something creative enough, you'll be able to get her to listen to what you have to say. You make it sound like you want me to trick her somehow. Not like that. Just be romantic. Girls love that stuff. She wants to be wooed. She's just scared and hurting. She thinks she wants Preston because he's the safe option, but deep down, she really wants you. Help her realize that. You really think she wants me deep down? I studied Hannah's face for any trace that she might be unsure in what she was saying. Yes. I have no doubt of it. If anything, this last performance cemented that in my mind. You were the one right with her on the stage. Couldn't you tell, too? I thought back over the performance. I couldn't deny that Destiny had acted like she still wanted me. It had confused me at the time because I'd assumed she was all wrapped up in Preston, but now that I thought about it, I realized that Hannah might just be right. And that meant one thing. I had to fight to get Destiny back. Chapter 16, Destiny. Olivia, can you hand me that roll of tape? I asked from the top of a kitchen chair. She handed me the masking tape. I ripped off a piece and taped the end of the neon green streamer to one of the corners above the kitchen table. Okay, I'm ready for the balloons. She passed me the cluster of hot pink and neon green balloons. Stretching awkwardly, I attempted to tape them into the corner. Hey! Preston came into the room with a gigantic smile. He wore a well-fitting red plaid shirt and jeans. He looked amazing, better than I'd seen him look in weeks. Megan followed beside him wearing a blue mini dress with leggings and black ankle boots. She set a present wrapped in glossy red paper on the table. I smoothed the tape over the rubber stems of the balloons and leaned back to inspect my work. The balloons promptly fell on my face. Oof, I said. That didn't work so well. Preston grabbed my hand and pulled me down from the chair. Want me to give it a try? Feel free. I was about to pop them and say forget it. He climbed up on the chair, and I tore off a few long strips of tape for him. He took them from me, and our hands touched momentarily, causing a shiver to go down my spine. With a determined look on his face, he crisscrossed the tape over the taped-up knots of the balloons. I think I need more. I tore off 2 more strips, and as he took them from me, the tape wrapped around one of my fingers, binding our hands together. The tape is sending you a message, Olivia said. Preston grinned as he peeled the tape off of our fingers with his other hand. I hadn't seen him so happy in such a long time. It was like I had the real Preston back again. He stuck the tape to the balloons and ran his hand along the messy crisscrossing layers of tape. It doesn't look that great now, but if you let go, the balloons hide the mess. That looks great, I said. Thanks for the help. Anytime. Just in time, too. I glanced at my watch. I think people should start coming any minute now. The doorbell rang. Right on cue, Preston said. I opened the front door and found Hannah and Evan standing there together. Hey. Hannah said. You came. I wasn't sure your mom would let you, I said. She doesn't know, Evan said. She thinks I'm taking Hannah out to dinner and a movie right now. And I will after this, but we still wanted to swing by. So, she has no clue we still hang out all the time? She knows we're in the musical together, but she doesn't know about the times I've gone to your house. She doesn't ask, and I don't tell. When's Michael getting here? Hannah asked as they came into the room. In about 5 minutes. We walked across the room and settled ourselves on the couch we'd pushed up against the back wall to clear a spot for dancing. There were more streamers and balloons strung above our heads, and a happy birthday pennant banner hung over the fireplace. There were kids clustered around the room in groups. The girls to the left were planning which guys to snag for the night. Hey, Hannah, Olivia said, taking a seat beside me on the couch. Hannah gave her a small wave and then turned to me. Who else did you invite? Hannah asked from beside Evan on the couch. Pretty much everyone we know from church between the ages of 14 and 18, Olivia said. I kind of went overboard inviting friends from church, Preston said. It's okay. You did great, I said. It won't just be our ward either, Olivia said. We have people coming from all over the state. Ward? Stake? Evan asked. Is that some kind of Mormon talk? Yeah, Preston said. Our church groups its members into congregations according to where they live. It's all very organized. A ward is a congregation of about 500 people, and a stake is a bunch of wards across the city. I don't know exactly how big it is, I said. But I know one of the buildings is about an hour away. Back when I lived in Utah, our stake covered 2 neighborhoods because the Mormons were so densely populated. Preston lowered himself into a cross-legged position on the floor in front of the couch. Some of the kids here live an hour away? Hannah asked. I don't see any of those people, but a few live at least 45 minutes away, I explained. More friends from the stake arrived at the same time Hudson, Deshawn, and Shanice did. Preston stepped up onto the hearth of our giant stone fireplace and whistled loudly. Hey! Everyone, listen up. The room grew quiet, and a few people from the kitchen came into the doorway. I just got a text from Michael's dad. They're on their way home from dinner and should be here in about 2 minutes. We're going to bring him in through the basement door by the kitchen, and we're all going to crowd into this room and shut the door. Everyone, including Elijah and Brianna, who didn't want to miss out on the fun, moved into the room. There were probably 50 people in there. Preston, Olivia, and I stepped into the kitchen. The plan was that we were supposed to look like we were hanging out with Mom while she put the finishing touches on Michael's birthday cake. As far as Michael knew, he was having a steak dinner with his dad and then cake with his family and his best friend. Preston checked the dining room window, which overlooked the driveway. They're coming up the driveway, he said, moving back into the kitchen. Shoo! Olivia popped her head into the family room. Everyone be quiet. They're here. By the time Michael came up the stairs with Dad, the entire house was silent. Hey, Michael, I said, doing my best to not crack a smile. How was your dinner? Mom asked. It was great, Michael said. Preston repressed the sneaky grin playing at the corners of his mouth. You should take a look at what Destiny and I fixed up for you in the family room. Okay, Michael said as Preston opened the door to the family room. All 50 people chorused, surprise, and Michael just about jumped out of his skin. Whoa! Michael said. Happy birthday! I said with a laugh as Michael went around greeting all his friends. He knew each of them by name like they were best buds. Preston and I opened the doors to the formal dining room where we'd stashed veggie trays, bowls of chips and dip, and platters piled with brownies and cookies. Earlier that day, we'd spent hours over at his house preparing everything so Michael wouldn't know. Then Mom had helped us transfer it all over in her Suburban. Olivia cranked up an old Justin Bieber song, and a few people started dancing. I wandered into the kitchen where throngs of people crowded around Mom as she filled cups with punch. So, this is how Mormons throw a party, huh? Hudson said, coming up beside me. I nodded and took a sip of punch. He continued, this is squeaky clean compared to the parties I used to go to back in Atlanta. I looked back into the family room and nodded. The couples that were slow dancing had about a foot of open air between their bodies. No wild partying for me. My parents stick around the entire time. I dipped a carrot stick in ranch dressing and took a bite. I'm a Mormon, too, Hudson said. I almost choked on my carrot. What? No way. Well, I think I am. My mom took me when I was a little kid, but we never go to church anymore. From the corner of the room Olivia stood backed against the cabinets, her mouth agape. You should come with us, I said. The church is just down the street from here. I'd never seen Olivia so reticent before. She really did have it bad for Hudson. A set of pretty, blonde twin girls walked into the kitchen talking animatedly. Have you met that new guy that's been coming to our ward lately? Not officially. But I walked next to him in the hall last week, and I almost passed out. The other girl dissolved into hysterical giggles. Hudson looked over his shoulder at the two girls and grinned wolfishly. Maybe I will go to church with you sometime. I was pretty sure he didn't notice the dark look he won from Olivia for making that comment. I didn't bother telling him those two girls didn't even go to church in our building. I wandered into the family room and leaned against the wall. Near the fireplace, Preston was smiling and talking to a girl with long, honey-colored hair. Preston said something to her that made her laugh, and she laid a hand on his arm to emphasize her enthusiasm. Hannah got up from where she was sitting across the room on the couch next to Evan and walked up to me. "Who's that girl talking to Preston?" Hannah murmured. "That's Lindsay Keaton. She seems pushy. I don't like her." "You're not the only one," I said under my breath. "She used to be in my ward when our family first converted. But then, her family moved to a more affluent area in town, and she switched into another ward. We still saw her a few times a year at our stake conferences, dances, and stake youth activities. She was my age, but she never smiled or said hi. She acted like the year and a half when we were in the same Sunday school class had never happened, like we'd never played as kids. It wasn't like I hadn't tried being her friend either. I'd said hi to her on a few occasions, and she'd say hi and then promptly walk away to talk to her snotty little group of friends, leaving me to feel like a complete loser. That was when our parents weren't around. Whenever our families saw each other in the halls after Sunday morning stake conferences, she always smiled sweetly at my parents and acted like we were old friends. She always dressed in the most expensive name-brand clothing, and the tuition at her private school was quadruple what Bethel's was. I'd been to her family's mansion for a church activity once about a year ago, and it made my house look like an outdated shack. "She has a lot of nerve, moving in on your man underneath your own roof." "He's not exactly my man," I pointed out. "Close enough. I say you go over there and show her what's what." Or not. Lindsay Keaton terrified me. There was no way I was going anywhere near her if I could help it. A soft, romantic ballad came on, and a few couples began pairing up to dance. Hudson drew Olivia to the center of the room to dance. Through the crowd, I spotted Michael dancing with Megan on the far side of the spacious family room. With the feeling of a knife twisting in my gut, I watched as Lindsay linked arms with Preston and led him to the dance floor. Hannah's eyes darkened, but before she could say anything, Evan came up to us and extended his elbow to her. She took his arm, and they joined the couples. I stood against the wall watching Lindsay flash Preston a flirty grin. I heard that Lindsay's parents are commissioning a fashion designer to make her prom dress this year. Annabelle stood in the kitchen doorway to my right. She was one of the girls from Lindsay's ward. Her jet black hair was gathered into a high ponytail, and she had a Prada bag slung over her arm. "Already?" "It's only January," said Emery, another girl from their clique. She sported tight, blonde, corkscrew curls that bounced when she moved. "Those kinds of things can take months," Annabelle said like she was a superior source of knowledge on custom-made prom dresses. Emery sighed. "It's like they're designing her wedding dress." I heard her mother say she wanted Lindsay to have something with sleeves, but I think she actually just likes the idea of having something custom-made. "Have you heard if Lindsay is running for the pageant again this year?" Emery asked. "Oh yeah, she's already signed up." A kid named Paul from my ward who hung out with Michael and Preston came up to Annabelle and said, "Would you like to dance?" He had glasses and an acne problem, but he was a pretty funny guy. Sometimes he came over to play paintball with us, and he'd been to several Boy Scout campouts on our land. Annabelle regarded him with an apologetic look that I suspected was less than sincere. "Oh, I'm sorry. I was just about to go to the bathroom." "It's kind of an emergency." "That's no problem." "Sorry to bother you," he mumbled. I caught his eye and gave him a sympathetic smile. He ambled my way. Hey, Paul. Hey. Do you want to dance? He asked. Sure. He smiled shyly, and I took his extended arm. He was about 6 months younger than me and 2 inches shorter, but I didn't mind. At least someone wanted to dance with me. He led me to an empty spot in the room that just happened to be within earshot of Preston and Lindsay. I love your shirt, Preston, Lindsay gushed. Red is a good color on you. You're so lucky you're 16 already, Paul said. I tore my gaze away from Preston's plaid-covered back and returned my focus to my dancing partner. Have you gotten your license yet? Paul asked. Not yet. I think my dad's taking me this week. He's the one who usually lets me practice driving. My mom gets too nervous to let me drive. I think she's still trying to heal from the scars she got from dealing with Michael's insane driving. Paul laughed heartily. That sounds just like my mom. I heard you're having your Eagle Court of Honor next week, I said. Yeah, it's about time. You're only 15. That's not bad. Most guys get it when they're about to graduate from high school, and you're still a freshman. It's still not as impressive as Preston or Michael. Weren't they like 13? Yep. My mom says that's because they were so focused on competing with each other. Whenever one of them would pass off a merit badge, the other would pass off 2 more, just to show him up. That's awesome. The song ended, and the couple scattered as a fast-paced song came on next. Hannah and Evan came up to me. We're gonna head out, Evan said. I need to go to the bathroom first, Hannah told him. I had a little too much punch. Okay, just find me when you're done. I'll be over by the food. Evan flashed her a dimpled grin before sauntering toward the kitchen. Hannah walked toward the guest bathroom, but turned around when she realized it was occupied. You can use the girls' bathroom in the hallway back by the bedrooms, I offered. I opened the door that led to the long hall leading to 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The lights were out since this part of the house wasn't open for the party. I shut the hall door behind me. Have you told him yet? I asked. She shook her head. He still doesn't know. I opened the door to the bathroom and said, when are you going to tell him? I was actually planning on telling him tonight at dinner, but tonight's been so much fun. Part of me doesn't want to ruin it. You might as well just get it over with. She looked down at her belly and placed a hand there. I still can't believe there's a little person inside me. It doesn't seem real, she whispered. Have you been to the doctor yet? I asked. No. If I go to the doctor, she'll just tell my parents. Go to the health department. They won't tell anyone, but I'll warn you, they might make you wait all day to be seen. Mom had taken us there when we'd gotten sick, and our insurance was messed up because Dad was in between jobs. But you need to make sure everything's okay with you and the baby. How am I going to go there without my parents finding out? Just tell the school office you're not feeling well, and you need to go to the doctor. It wouldn't even be a lie. Hannah nodded and went into the bathroom. I turned back to the family room. Through the closed hallway door, I could hear a song blasting from an upbeat boy band. I opened the door, and the noise level increased dramatically. Hudson and Michael were sprawled on the floor in an arm wrestling match with kids circled around them as spectators. Olivia stood with a couple of girls her age who swooned openly at the muscular display before them. A few of the boys chanted Michael's name loudly as the 2 guys battled. Go Hudson! Olivia screeched. Hudson looked up in her direction, and it was just the distraction that Michael needed to smash his hand down. I was impressed. Not only was he a small guy, but Michael was 2 years older and a football player. Despite all of that, Hudson had still held his own fairly well. I think you've got some competition coming your way with the ladies, Michael, I said as he climbed from the floor. Nah, I was going easy on him, Michael said. You don't have to worry too much about him, Paul said, slapping Michael on the back. The main girl he seems to have eyes for is Olivia. What? A shadow clouded Michael's face. He danced with her once. I don't think that counts, I said. I heard he's a Mormon. Is that true? Paul asked. Yeah, he told me so himself, I said. I hadn't heard that, Michael said. He whipped his head around and scrutinized Hudson with a new light in his eyes. I glanced into the kitchen and chuckled to see Hannah smack Evan playfully on the arm with the back of her hand. Hey, we're supposed to be going to dinner in a few minutes, and you're not even going to be hungry by then. Don't worry, I ran 5 miles today. I could eat 3 more dinners. It was probably a good thing he was eating before he got to the restaurant, because once Hannah delivered her news his appetite would be gone altogether. That's so not fair. Hannah rolled her eyes. Guys get to eat like pigs without gaining a pound. Well, especially not when we're running 5 miles a day. Preston stepped out from behind 2 girls refilling their cups with punch. Hey, Destiny, I was looking for you. You were? Yeah, do you want to dance? He came all the way into the kitchen to find me so he could ask me to dance. A smile tugged at the corners of my lips. I'd love to. Hannah and Evan walked past as Preston and I moved into the family room. See you later, Destiny. Happy birthday, Michael. Hannah called and waved. Preston slid his arm around my waist comfortably, and I reached up and curled my hand around his shoulder. It felt so right being with him, like coming home. I could practically feel the goodness radiating from him. There was something about him that set me at ease and made me feel like I belonged. I looked up into his green eyes and smiled. Suddenly, I was ultra-aware of the way his thumb moved over my hand absently, how his fingers felt interlaced with mine, and the warmth of his arm around my waist. How muscular his shoulder felt under his red shirt. I had a flash of memory back to the day we'd stolen his underwear, and he'd walked back to his bedroom bare-chested. He was so beautiful, inside and out. Whether I was willing to admit it to myself or not, I'd known it all along. Other girls were beginning to notice it, too. If I wasn't careful, I'd lose him. I'd seen that tonight with Lindsay. I felt an intense desire to show him how I felt, but I didn't know how. How could I ever allow my heart to heal enough to let someone back in, to trust again? My wounds were healing, but I was still so raw inside. Chapter 17, Preston. The song ended, and Destiny and I had hardly even spoken to each other. But somehow, it was okay. It was like we didn't need to, we were just happy to be together. I crooked my arm, and she nestled her hand around it. I led her to the side of the room, and when she began to withdraw her hand, I held my hand over hers and leaned my head toward hers until our foreheads touched. I have something for you, but I don't want to give it to you with everyone else around. Her eyes widened. For me? But it's not my birthday. You'll see. Okay. She shrugged. We can go to the screened porch if you want. I inclined my head. Grab your jacket and meet me out there. I ran out to my truck and grabbed the gift for Destiny from under the driver's seat. When I got back in the house, I went through the kitchen to open the door to the deck. Where are you going? Olivia asked. I just looked at her for a moment. Out. Oh my gosh. You're having a secret rendezvous with Destiny, aren't you? I totally just saw her go out there. Well, I guess it's not a secret now, I said, glancing over my shoulder. One of Lindsay's friends slinked away into the family room. Before anyone else could comment, I slipped through the door and clicked it shut behind me. The deck connected to the pool area and the spacious screened porch where they did all of their grilling. On the screened porch, the Clarks had a long cushioned swing and a patio set. Against the back wall of the house was a set of decorative shelves where they kept their pool supplies and beach towels during the summer when it was warm enough to swim. Usually, her mom stored the cushion from the swing over the winter, but she hadn't gotten around to it this year. Destiny stood in the middle of the porch, and I strode toward her with the present. This is for you. Thanks. She took the small, rectangular gift and slid a finger underneath the tape, securing the black and white polka-dotted paper. The paper fell away, revealing a red leather-bound journal with gold-tipped pages. "It's for your poetry. I wanted you to have something nicer than that spiral-bound notebook you've been using." "Preston, I love it." She stepped forward and threw her arms around my neck. "There's something else, too," I said apprehensively, taking a step back. "Open to the first page." Destiny found the gold satin ribbon marking the beginning of the book. When she saw my poem, a small gasp escaped from her lips. "You wrote this? For me?" I nodded. "Sit down. I want you to read it." I put my arm around her shoulders and led her to the swing. I sat close, pulled out my cell phone, and turned on the display so she could have a little reading light. I could have just turned on the light over our heads, but wanted to avoid the attention it would bring. We bent our heads over the book and read. "When days are dark, and nights are long, and music dies without a song, and wrongs are right, and right is wrong. When lovers lie, and liars love, and crows outfly, the hopeful dove, and voices cry to God above. When saints lament, and sinners pray, and sturdy trees begin to sway, she's there ahead. She lights my way. Her smile so bright, and eyes so blue. Her angel ways, her heart so true. I pray someday to walk with you." As she read, I felt my face grow hot. I'd never put myself out there like this, and quite frankly, it terrified me. "It's a little rough, but there it is," I said, shrugging off the embarrassment. No. It's amazing. I love it." She took my hand, lacing my fingers with hers. My fingers curled around her hand like they had always belonged there. I looked down into her blue eyes that sparkled like sapphires even in the dim light of my cell phone. "Does this poem mean you like me better than Lindsay? Lindsay Keaton?" A slow smile spread across my face, and I tilted my head to the side. "Do I sense a touch of jealousy here?" She stopped smiling. Great. Now I'd made her mad. She tried to jerk her hand away from mine, but I held it firmly. "Destiny, you have nothing to worry about," I said reassuringly. "She doesn't even hold a candle, compared to your flame. Not even close. She's a nice enough girl, I guess, but she kind of threw herself at me tonight. The entire time I was dancing with her, I just wanted to be with you." She searched my face in the dim glow of my cell phone, and her features softened. She relaxed the pull on my hand, and I drew her closer. "You have no idea how much that means to me," she whispered. I released her hand and gently cupped her face. I leaned in so close I could smell the sweet vanilla scent of her chapstick, and it took me back to the day of the snowball fight. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. As I brought my face to hers haltingly, her sweet breath hit my face and my pulse quickened. When my lips brushed hers, she responded by kissing me back tenderly. I pulled back for a moment to take a breath, and she released a small sigh. I gave a low laugh and leaned in to kiss her again, this time for real. Chapter 18, Destiny. Preston leaned back, and my head was spinning with him, all of him. His smell, his muscular body, and his rock-solid stability. He was trustworthy and loyal to the core. We'd been through so much together, and he'd been the answer to so many of my problems. Being with him was so simple, even our silences were effortless. He pressed his forehead to mine, his hand still around the back of my neck. "Destiny, you're so beautiful." I couldn't help the smile that pulled my lips upward. "I could get used to hearing you say that more often." "I'll make sure you hear it every day then. I could stay out here all night kissing you like this." He reluctantly slipped his hand from the back of my neck, the sensitive skin back there still tingling from his touch. "But as much as I would love to do that, we should probably get back in the house." He brushed my hair back from my face. You're the most beautiful, talented, adventurous girl I know, and I've been crazy about you for a very long time. You have? Like how long? You didn't have a clue, did you? What do you mean? Destiny, he said, his voice low. I've been crazy about you since the first day I saw you. What? My eyes widened. All that time. He nodded eagerly. I'll never forget it. It was Easter Sunday, and your family had just gotten baptized. You walked in wearing this bright green dress. You were with your entire family, but all I could see was you. I shuddered, and he looked down at me with such tenderness in his eyes I thought my heart would burst with joy. I wrapped my arms around him, and he held me tightly. His body was warm and protected me from the cold. Preston kissed the top of my head and said, I have to say, I've been to some good parties, but this one tops them all. I laughed. Understatement of the year. I say we go get some food. He took my hand in his. Good idea. I'm freezing, I said with a shudder. Nah, it's invigorating, he said with a boyish grin. I really am hungry though. You're 17, and you're a guy. When are you ever not hungry? Good point. He opened the door to the kitchen. Hudson sat at the bar, surrounded by 5 girls, Olivia and Megan included, and they were all laughing. He spun around toward us on his stool and said, What are you two smiling about? I blushed, but my smile only got bigger. Someone needs to spill, Olivia said. They look like they found a little pot of gold on the back porch, Megan said. Preston grinned. The pretty blonde twins from earlier rushed into the kitchen. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm trying so hard not to freak out right now. I eyed them curiously. I can't believe he's here. He's so amazingly gorgeous. Do you think he saw me? We should go talk to him. Do you think he has a thing for twins? Do you think he has a brother? I wish he were a twin. The words were spouting from their mouths so rapidly I could hardly understand them. A few months ago, when I was doing a research paper for English, I stumbled across this article online that said it was common for twins to have their own language as babies. Maybe this insane babble was some offshoot left over from their twin language in their toddler days. Megan met my eye with a curiosity that equaled my own. Excuse me, I said as I maneuvered around the twins, who were still speaking their strange hyper-nonsense, and made my way through the kitchen. I walked into the living room and didn't see any sign of who they might be talking about. There was a small commotion outside. I stepped onto the porch to investigate. I walked down and around the sidewalk as it curved around the corner of the house and stopped in my tracks. Isaac? Thank you for listening to a stronger version of me. Book 5 of the Destiny Clark Saga. Written by Cindy Ray Hale. Text copyright 2019 by Cindy Ray Hale. Production copyright 2023 by Cindy Ray Hale.